Welcome back to the channel. This is Trinity Storm and you're watching third part of What If Naruto Was the Heir of an Unknown Goddess. If you enjoyed this video, please like, share and subscribe to the channel. Now wasting no more time, let's start the story.
Inside her lab, Washu frowned and sat back, massaging the bridge of her nose from the migraine she'd been given. Despite what her friends thought, she detested working late into the night, which is precisely what she had been made to do. The catalyst for her action had been the news that Seto had alerted her to. She estimated that it was almost 2 in the morning, which meant that she had been working for almost 5 hours after getting ready for bed. I guess I have to give an exception now and then. The genius mused. Actually, this was the one occasion when she could have broken her work rules. Since she was familiar with Melmus's population, the news that the Niju had received a vision of what lay ahead did not come as a surprise to her. They had combined that with the information Jiraiya had obtained regarding a group of Nin who were purportedly hunting the Biju when Seto had gone to see the Hokage. The true motivator, though, was Naruto's significant influence over the happenings on this planet. Since she wasn't sure at first, she summoned some of the power she kept hidden, which enabled her to establish a spiritual connection with the planet. She was met right away by a young woman named Kira who appeared to have been waiting for her and who was able to provide her with a more thorough explanation of the situation. What was in front of her now was the outcome of that conversation. Over the past few hours, she had made a number of significant changes to the power core that housed the Kyuubi's consciousness. She had not only brought it fully into balance, but she had also made adjustments that allowed it to function as a single entity. She was startled out of her reverie by a gentle beeping sound on her nose. When she looked up, she saw that the percentage bar that had been occupying her screen had filled completely, indicating that the task had been completed. She got up from her chair and moved toward a metal workbench, which had a finger grid equipped protrusion in the shape of a circle in the center. She turned it clockwise until it stopped, then stepped back as steam shot out and the circle rose, revealing that it was actually a cap attached to a sizable glass container that contained a sizable red glowing ball of energy. She was happy to see that everything had gone according to plan when she checked the stabilization levels. When she applied pressure to the top, it slid back easily and hid inside the workbench. She yawned and turned away, turning away from the lab and turning off everything as soon as she was outside. Early in the morning, Konoha was a breathtaking sight. The early hour never failed to bring a sense of tranquility to the Sandaime Hokage's mind, even in the absence of the full hustle and bustle. It gave him time to reflect and mentally get ready for the day ahead while he gazed out his office window at the village. At last, though, he turned his back on the scene and went to his desk chair. His personal Anbu guards, who were accustomed to his ways, each assumed a different spot in the room before blending into the background. The office doors opened at precisely 7:30, marking the official start of his day. His secretary led in the first guests of the day, a woman by the name of Seto and another woman by the name of Washu, along with Kakashi. Jiraiya strolled in from the balcony, tucking his own pipe away as he went, and his office window opened. After every door had shut, Sandaime touched a secret sealing array on his desk, causing the room's privacy seals on the walls, ceiling, and floor to activate instantaneously. "Kakashi, how are things going on the exams?" asked Sandaime. "We are currently approaching day 3 of the second exam. As of right now, only 4 teams, teams 7, 8, 10, and 1 from Suna, have surpassed the other teams. Last night, my team and Asuma's team arrived together. Amino Uruka discovered me in the lounge and informed me that Sasuke had attempted to attack Naruto and that, based on the Team 10 report, he had been covered in odd markings and strange chakra. Sasuke had been marked with a cursed seal, which I used the Fujihoin to seal away when I brought him to a secluded area of the tower," reported Kakashi. "Tell me about any issues you find with the Uchiha. If needed, Jiraiya can apply a more robust seal on him," the Sandaime said, receiving a nod from the Junin wearing a mask. "Lady Washu, I hope you were not inconvenienced by our request." The Sandaime turned to face the short, red-haired woman and stated as much. "Not in a big way. But for the record, I would not have done it at all if it weren't for the current circumstances." Washu grabbed a metal case from the floor next to her and gave it to Kakashi while she was speaking. The Sandaime simply nodded in agreement. Although this was the last thing he wanted to do, in his opinion, it was also Naruto's best chance of survival, so that was what mattered most. Hiruzen asked, "Kakashi, how has he been doing?" "Truthfully, we've hit a wall." Kakashi sighed as she said. At first glance, it appeared that the extraction had only been beneficial. But it turns out that was a mistaken assessment because I've found a significant issue. I've made him feel as though the extraction destroyed his control and that he would have to bring it up again. In actuality, I had a medic surreptitiously scan his chakra, and they found that there is an imbalance of 65 to 35, with his physical chakra being the dominant one. He is still capable of using ninjutsu, but not to the same extent as before. He can now only create 20 shadow clones, compared to his previous ability to create over 100. The doctors hypothesized that Kyuubi's stronger chakra than his own had worked to both conceal and completely ignore the imbalance, which is why it went unnoticed. Declared Kakashi. When the other two shinobi in the room realized exactly what that meant, they grimaced. It made perfect sense that the boy would struggle to use his chakras given the imbalance in his energy, so it really clarified a lot of the boy's chakra control problems. Higher-level shinobi came to understand that balance was the essence of chakra in its purest form. A shinobi could only truly claim to have mastered their chakra after they reached a certain level of balance and manipulation, though some arts concentrated on specific forms. Chakra control exercises helped achieve this. I might know someone who could fix that, Jiraiya said, drawing the attention of the other two shinobi to him. I'll train the Gaki under my supervision for the month before the exam, taking it with me. Just concentrate on the other two, Kakashi, until we return. Jiraiya said in a serious tone that there was no room for debate, telling everyone as much. The legendary Sandaime Hokage asked, would this person happen to be someone I know? Which made the Gamma Sennin sigh. Yeah, I just hope they don't kill me when they see me. Naruto was startled rather violently out of a dream in which he was swimming in a ramen pool inside the central tower of the Forest of Death. He noticed his sensei, who had white hair, was looking down at him gravely as he looked up. The blonde slowly awoke, blinking as he reached up to wipe the sleep from his eyes and shifted to put his feet on the ground. What time is it? The blonde asked, frowning. 0800. The blonde groaned when he heard the succinct and accurate response. He wasn't and probably never would be a morning person. So what's up, sensei? Asked the boy, reasoning that he would be able to return to sleep sooner if they cleared whatever was up as soon as possible. Recent information has surfaced, raising concerns about your safety from Hokage Sama, even though it is currently beyond your level of clearance to know. Not only that, but your grandparents and Seto Sama have also voiced their concerns about the state of affairs. Lady Washu is giving you this for the time being as a result. After saying so, the cycloptic Junin took out a scroll from his vest pocket. He then unfolded it and released the characteristic puff of smoke that appeared when something is unsealed, and he held a sizable steel briefcase in his hand. Taking the case in his own hands, Naruto blinked wearily, looking at the case and then at his sensei, only to discover that the man had vanished. He then sighed and set the case down on the bed. Before he could say anything, he heard an odd beeping sound. Turning around, he saw that the top of the case had split in half, with a vertical line slicing through the middle and each half sliding back until its inner edge rested on the edge that had previously been there. Looking inside, he saw that he was staring at a small screen that quickly raised and rotated to sit directly in front of his face before flickering to reveal Washu seated in her lab chair and intently staring into the camera. Good morning, Dono Naruto. I'm hoping all is well with you. Now that I've sent you this care package, there are a few things we should talk about. The finished core, which houses the Kyuubi's chakra and sentience, is contained within this case. You should be aware that this will not be the same as the last time you two were bonded before moving forward. You should view this as a partnership instead of the previous situation where you acted as a jailer. Your DNA serves as the key, and once you grasp hold of the core, it will be absorbed into your body, simultaneously forming a link or bond between the two of you. But since your body has never experienced the Kyuubi's full power, it might take some getting used to. Everything else will remain the same, with the exception that you have the freedom to take out and put back in the core whenever you choose. Outlined what he now understood to be a genius's recording. To be honest, he was unsure of how to react to this new revelation. Even though he had been relieved to be free of the Kyuubi, he had never disclosed to anyone how exposed he had become. He could even run Anbu members into the ground, and as far back as he could recall, he had always been more energetic than everyone else around him. He discovered that his stamina had drastically decreased after the removal. Although he still possessed roughly 4 times as much chakra as Kakashi, he didn't feel the same. He became acutely aware of how much he had been undervaluing the things he had taken for granted, at the same time. With the knowledge that he would always prevail in an attrition battle and be able to overwhelm any opponent with an absurd number of shadow clones, he had never had to think carefully about what he did in combat. He had discovered a number of previously unknown facts about himself over the course of the previous month. Being made to essentially return to his roots had caused him to reassess his life and resume his Kage Bunshin activities. He chose to hit his opponents hard and quickly, just like he used to, rather than depending on numbers to overwhelm them. After all, he had always outperformed his peers in terms of raw strength and battle instinct. Even though he hadn't always had the technical skill that everyone else possessed, he was cunning enough to figure out how to land the blow that would end it. One good blow from him was enough to lay some people out. His training with Kakashi had only made him more formidable because, in less than 6 months, he had acquired the technical skill and a taijutsu style necessary to defeat Sasuke using only taijutsu. All of this had been accomplished by sheer hard work and determination. Even so, he would be dishonest if he claimed he didn't long for his former self. The moment he discovered the truth about what had happened to him that night, almost 13 years ago, when he had stood in front of the fox's cage, he knew that one day his ambition to outperform every cage before him would be realized. He was already so strong in terms of sheer power that he most likely would have been unstoppable if he had ever managed to harness the dormant power. Even so, he was conceited. He didn't like the idea of depending on anyone or anything, and he didn't think it was right to be powerful only because of the Kyuubi. But now that he had experienced what it was like to be an ordinary human, he would concede, if only to himself, that he would prefer to return to his previous life. In any case, he would set those ideas aside while the recording continued. This is because I'm currently working on something else, and the core will serve as the primary power source. This implies that everything I make will only be useful to you. That's all I have to say, though, because I want the rest to be a surprise. Nevertheless, good luck on the remaining portions of the test. Oh, and have fun. I've also included a little something to kill time. The screen went dark and the message came to an end. With a sigh at what he saw, he bent down and took out a tiny portable gadget from the briefcase. He had witnessed one previously, as Mihashi possessed one and devoted a significant amount of her time to moving the screen non-stop. He heard a hiss as he sat it down, and then he saw the red orb appear as the briefcase's interior lifted, revealing white smoke rising from its depths. He felt as though he was now weighing his life on a scale and deciding which option held the greater reward. For several minutes, he just sat there staring at the orb, knowing that his next move would surely determine his future. He had been the Kyuubi's vessel from the start and had to live with the consequences of that decision for the rest of his life. With rare exceptions, the villagers had essentially shunned and neglected him. It had strengthened him despite the overwhelming loneliness that had followed. Since he had experienced hardship as a child, he was a survivor, unlike most children who gave up when faced with difficulties. At the same time, he could see what the reverse could have been in Konohamaru. When he had first met the grandson of the Sandaime and gotten to know and speak with him, he had seen just what kind of shadow being known as the son of the Yondaime could have forced him under. The villagers simply saw him as a title, not even a real person in his own right, and so Naruto had took the boy under his wing to help to bring out his true character. He didn't like to admit it, but he knew that could have easily been him, and just imagining himself as one of those spoiled rich kids who thought everything should just be handed to them like Konohamaru had been or like Sasuke still was sickened him. So yes, being a container had forced him into living through some hard times, but there were hidden bonuses as well. Despite his malnourishment as a chibi, he had never actually been sick a day in his life. He had never gotten too cold or too hot. On the other hand, he had grown up wishing that he could be normal, just like everyone else, without even truly understanding what had set him apart from everyone else. Now he was, and what did he really have to show for it? He didn't feel any different than he did before, except for the major hit he'd taken in the stamina and energy department. However, ever since he and the fox had separated, people had slowly began to look at him as Naruto and not as some shadow of the fox, as if they truly wanted to see who he was. The problem was, however, that he didn't even really know who he was. He had never really had a strong sense of self, and growing up he had tried to avoid thinking because he eventually had to ask that very question. Still, even though he had yet to answer that question, what with all the revelations that had popped up about himself over the last little stretch of time, all the new titles that had been added to the plate, son of the Yondaime, grandson of the Nidaime, prince of Jirai, even though none of those titles answered the question of who he was, he knew what he wasn't, and normal wasn't it. If someone would have asked him earlier if he was separated from the Kyuubi what he would do, taking the fox back in would not have been the answer. Yet that is exactly what he was doing. Unlike before, it was not a burden that was thrust upon him, but something that he himself chose to take on. He knew this to be true even as he removed the large sphere of energy from the case and held it in hand. For a moment he just eyed the sphere before suddenly it dissolved into pure energy and shot into his hand. For several seconds he simply blinked before a pain unlike any other he had ever experienced racked his entire body. It was as if liquid fire was racing through his very veins, replacing his blood, and if that wasn't bad enough, a new pain suddenly hit him as his body fell to the floor as chakra surged out of his body, becoming a fiery aura that surrounded his form before he finally screamed out his agony and passed out. Elsewhere within the village, Tenyo walked down the street with a small smile on her face. Over the time they had been in the village, she had made it something of a routine for her to walk through the village daily. Usually she wound up at the academy to converse with Iruka, who Naruto had introduced her to a while back, and she could see that the two were actually quite close whenever they were together. At the moment she was outside of her usual route and had been joined by her aunt Minaho as they made their way to Ichiraku's ramen stand along with Kakashi, who was acting as their escort after having ran into them several minutes prior. In an effort to better blend in, Minaho had changed from her Jiren robes and instead wore a green dress which stopped at her shins with a pair of black sandals that went up to just past her ankles, while beneath the dress was a white sleeveless and collarless blouse. Thankfully her sister hadn't changed much size-wise, otherwise raiding her clothes would have been a major letdown. Tenyo was also wearing one of her late sister's outfits, only opting for a very light blue kimono decorated with butterflies and tied with a purple obi. As they entered through the flaps of the stand, Minaho took just a moment to breathe in the scent of the noodles, as she had her own healthy love of the dish, though nothing like her sister's near obsession. "Welcome to Ichiraku's," greeted Ayame with a smile which Kakashi knew was not forced, as she actually was a morning person. "Hey Ayame, is your father in yet?" asked the silver-haired Junin, already knowing the answer but asking anyway. "Sure, let me get him," said Ayame, disappearing into the back only to reappear several minutes later with Tucci. "Kakashi, a little early for you to be out and about, isn't it?" questioned Tucci as he made his appearance. "Actually, I was on my way back from checking in with the kids when I ran into these two and decided I could play escort for a bit when I find out they were heading here," said Kakashi. Tucci almost snorted but managed to withhold the action at the last instant. Having known the Junin for as long as he had, he knew that he didn't just run into them, and instead had likely scouted them out and waited for an opportunity to make his entrance. Turning to the two women, he had to admit that the brats certainly had good taste just from their physical aspects alone. "So how can I help you ladies?" questioned Tucci. "Well, Tucci-san, I actually wanted to thank you for looking after Naruto-kun all this time," said Minaho. "Don't worry about that, the Gaki's family. I looked out for him just like I know his parents would have looked out for Yame if anything happened to me," said Tucci. "Despite this, I felt that it was only right that we return the favor." Just as she said this, Minaho handed Ayame a booklet from the bag she'd been carrying. The days had passed quickly, and all too soon the fifth and final day had passed, bringing with it the end of the second exam. At this moment all those who had passed stood within a large room with several upper-level shinobi standing above them on platforms, including the proctors of the first two exams and the Hokage himself. As he looked around, the Hokage ran critical eyes on the group of genin that had made it thus far. 5 teams from Konoha, 4 of which were taking the exams for the first time, and of those 4, 3 of those teams comprised of rookies. To say he was pleased was actually quite an understatement. Of the other teams in attendance, there was 1 from Suna, 1 from Taki, and even 1 from AIM. This meant there was now a grand total of 24 genin in attendance, something which caused Anko to grit her teeth in aggravation, having wanted to cut the numbers down to the single digits. "Well, I guess I have to say congratulations to you brats, since somehow all of you managed to get here. You passed," stated Anko. As Anko stepped back and the Sandame stepped forward to deliver his speech, Naruto found himself tuning it out. Now this was in no way due to being disinterested in what the man had to say, but more that he'd heard it several times before from the man. The Chunin exams weren't just about getting a promotion but acted as a substitution for war amongst the various villages, blah, blah, blah. Sure, it was important to know from a factual standpoint, but once again heard it once, heard it a million times. Instead, he spent the time during the old man's speech doing something he hadn't done in months, planning a prank. Of course, most people would wonder why, in the middle of an exam as important as what this one was, would he be planning something as juvenile as a prank? The answer to that was quite simple. As far as he was concerned, a challenge had been issued. Sure, he was in the forest tower and hadn't witnessed it himself, but Kakashi during one of his visits to check up on him had informed him of the offense, and as a great man once said, To be the man, you've got to beat the man. His thoughts, however, were brought back to his surroundings as the speech ended, signaled by the old man stepping back as a new person took his place. The man stood at about 5 feet 7 and wore the garb of a Konoha shinobi of Chunin rank or higher, Hide on his forehead stitched into a bandana, and had short dark brown hair and markings beneath his eyes suggesting a lack of sleep. However, it was the chronic coughing that he was doing that let everyone know that he was actually ill. "My name is Gecko Hayate, I am the proctor for the third exam," stated the man before coughing harshly into his hand several times before he was able to continue. "However, before we can get into that, I first must inform all of you that prior to the third exam we will be undergoing a preliminary exam so that you can qualify," stated the Junin. "What, why?" questioned more than a few of the assembled genin. "Due to the importance of several of the individuals that will be in attendance for the third exam, it is placed under a time constraint. This in turn means that there is a select number of genin that can participate. As for why this is the case this year, perhaps because the first 2 exams may have been too easy this time around," said Hayate, causing several of them to gape. "Regardless of any reason, from this point forward the exam will be a solo effort, as it is quite possible that some of you are here due solely to your teammates carrying you through it. As such, the preliminaries will determine just who among you deserves to continue forward. If there is anyone among you who would like to bow out, now is the time," stated Hayate. For several long moments all was silent until a pair of hands rose amongst the competing genin. Taking a moment to look them over, Naruto found that one was a boy from Taki who wore black pants and a gray shirt over which was a dark blue jacket. He had spiky brown hair and was currently favoring his left arm, which explained why he had decided to opt out at this point. The other was an older genin he recognized as Yakushi Kabuto. However, unlike the Taki genin, he didn't have a single injury, showing why he was opting out. If he actually knew about the guy from more than just one meeting, he might have said something, but as he didn't, he simply didn't care and let the matter drop. However, while Naruto may have been content to let the matter drop, a pair of eyes narrowed on the boy as he moved to leave the room. "Nay, didn't that kid drop out at this same point last time?" questioned Anko quietly, remembering as it was her first time as a proctor. Raising his eyebrow at the question, the scar-faced interrogator opened up a dossier with the boy's picture on it. Quickly scanning it, he found something highly irregular in that not only was this his 7th time taking the exam, he had quit at the same point 6 times prior. Narrowing his eyes in anger, Ibiki spoke quietly into a headpiece he was wearing before hearing a confirmation of his order replied through the opposite end before he turned his attention back to the center of the room. "Now then, as there are now 23 of you left, let it be known that whoever is not selected will receive an automatic entrance into the third exam." Just after he said this, a large section of the wall slid away to reveal a large screen to the eyes of the gathered genin. As it became active, the picture was jumbled as it cycled for nearly a minute before it stopped displaying a pair of names. Inuzuka Kiba vs. Yudachi. As the 2 names were displayed, everyone but those named moved up to the catwalks above to observe the match. For his part, Kiba smirked at having been given the first match even as he eyed his opponent. Looking at him, one could see that Yudachi was about 15 and, like Kiba himself, had short brown hair, though he stood at perhaps 5 feet 7 inches, giving him almost a foot of height on Kiba, who was only 4 feet 9. Despite the obvious difference in size, Kiba wasn't the least bit intimidated and proved it, for as soon as the proctor gave the signal to start, the Inuzuka had closed the distance between himself and the older genin so quickly the aim nin could only look on in shock as Kiba slammed him with a knee to the sternum that hit with such force he was sent skidding back nearly 3 feet. Not even giving him a chance to recover, the Inuzuka bounded after him, and before his opponent could even look up from his recovery attempt, the Inuzuka had pounced, forcing him to the ground with his right hand reared back, his hands now clawed and ready to bring it down, only for the other team to quickly scream out his surrender. As the sound registered, Kiba blinked in shock before growling low in his throat in aggravation. "That's it, 2 moves in and he quits. The warm-ups me and Naruto had in the academy lasted longer," raged the Inuzuka internally, giving the older teen a look of disgust before stalking off. Kiba, however, wasn't the only one disappointed in the length of time that had taken. In fact, if looks could kill, the aim nin wouldn't even be a pile of ash at that point, as every single guy in the room was glaring at him. It was only when he started spitting up blood that the glaring ceased in exchange for looks of confusion. Frowning himself, Hayate quickly called for the medics, who after several minutes of work loaded the teen onto a stretcher and carried him away. Once the area was clear of medical personnel, Hayate quickly restarted the screen, watching as the names cycled before stopping on the names of 2 more genin. Rock Lee vs. Hoki. Yosh. Came the excited cry from Rock Lee as his name appeared on the board, causing him to leap over the rail to the ground in his excitement. His opponent Hoki, however, took a bit longer to get down, preferring to take the stairs. Physically speaking, Hoki seemed like he would have the advantage over the green beast, appearing to be about 16 or 17 years old and had to stand at least 5 feet 6, while Lee himself was only 5 feet 2. Hoki wore a gray shirt beneath a dark blue trench coat and black pants with his takehide tae secured around his forehead. As they took their positions, Hayate eyed them both and, seeing that both genin were ready, started the match. Immediately the two were in motion, with Hoki leaping back and flinging a kuni at Lee, only for the green beast to rush him at the same moment, dodging around the kunai easily. Quickly closing the distance between them, Lee leapt forward through the air, opening up with his signature Konoha Senpu, and while Hoki was able to duck out of the way of the high kick, it left him open for the low kick that followed, slamming into his chest and throwing him back. Recovering quickly, the Taki Nin used the momentum of the kick to put some distance between them, running through a short chain of seals before expelling a stream of water from his mouth. Lee, however, had not remained idle and had quickly moved to close the distance. Seeing the water coming, the green beast dropped into a slide, taking him under the powerful spray and directly to his opponent, who could only look on wide-eyed as the younger teen connected with a rising kick to his chin that sent him airborne. Flipping himself backwards with the momentum of the kick, Hoki reached into his coat and withdrew a pair of tonfa from behind his back. Unfortunately for him, he underestimated his momentum and wasn't minding his surroundings as he slammed back first into the statue in the center of the room, hitting with such force his entire body straightened, resulting in the back of his head slamming into the stone before he fell to the ground. After several moments of spying the boy's unmoving form, Hayate walked over to him and, after checking him over once again, called in the medics before moving away. Winner by knockout, Rock Lee. But I didn't even kick him that hard, thought Lee, crocodile tears trailing down his face as he made his way back up to the catwalk. After Hoki was collected by the medics, everyone turned once more to see the screen had started up once more. As it flew through the names, all of the genin watched it either in anticipation or anxiousness, but nevertheless all eyes were on the screen until finally it stopped revealing the next pair of names. Elsewhere, the members of Clan Masaki had been gathered within a large sitting room within the main house on the Senju clan estate. The Senju estates resembled the Hyuga estate in that its design was very traditional, complete with sliding shoji doors which made them feel very much at home, as it was much like the house in which they lived on Earth. Joining them was Jiraiya, who had been introduced to them by Seto not much earlier. They had all just enjoyed a nice lunch prepared by Sasama, Noik, and Kiriko, much to the group's satisfaction, though Jiraiya and Seto had arrived in the midst of its preparation, so it had been no problem to prepare just a bit extra to serve him. That was without doubt one of the best meals that I have had in years. You ladies have a real talent, said Jiraiya, causing all three to blush slightly at the praise. Now then, Jiraiya-san, if you would please explain the purpose of your visit, said Seto, causing a serious expression to cover the face of the Toad Sage. Very well. I'll make this short and to the point. The reason for my visit is to inform you that for the time leading up to the exams, I will be taking Naruto with me to a place where he can get some more intense training. Why can you not do this training here? Questioned Ayeka with a frown. Truthfully, because I'm not going to be the one in charge of his training for the most part. After speaking with Kakashi, it was determined that he needs a certain kind of training which I don't specialize in. Furthermore, there is only one person who can actually teach him all that he needs to know, and while Kakashi has a decent grasp of the basics, it is not enough, said Jiraiya. When would you be trying to leave? Questioned Irie. There is a preliminary round being held at this moment to determine who will participate in the main exam. I will be taking him immediately afterwards, stated Jiraiya. Understandable, you wish to maximize training time. However, I feel that is not all concerning this meeting, stated Seto. Correct, there is one last secret concerning Naruto that he must be made aware of concerning his heritage, a secret that not even the council or our daimyo is aware of, and there is only one person who can inform him, explained Jiraiya. If that is the case, then it is only right that a few members of his family accompany him. I believe Yosho, Irie and Sasami would suffice in this instance, stated Seto. I don't know about that, we won't be using wagons or anything of the sort, stated Jiraiya with a frown. If it's a question of an ability to keep up, then trust me, they will be capable, stated Seto. Naruto sighed as the last of the competitors were taken away. The last few matches had all been short and for the most part uninteresting. Asuna nin by the name of Konkuro had been put up against an older leaf nin named Tsurugi Masumi, who had demonstrated an ability to stretch his limbs to great proportions. He had wrapped himself around his opponent only for his opponent to be revealed as a puppet, while the real Kankuro had been wrapped up in bandages and had waited to reveal himself until he had a sure win by having the puppet literally squeeze the life out of him. Following this, Sasuke had been pit against Ataki Nin, who had proven himself to be far too weak to have been put against the Uchiha Heir. Following this, the Kunoichi from Suna, Temari had been pit against Ino, with the latter losing rather easily to the more experienced Kunoichi. Following this, another Leaf Nin named Hyuga Neji had been put up against a genin from AIM named Rusui, only to put him down with one strike. As the next names came up, Naruto perked up slightly at seeing one of the people he was more interested in seeing in action had been selected. Samadare vs. Gaara. As the two of them made their way down, Naruto took the time to look over Samadare. He had spiky brown hair with a ponytail and short spiky bangs hanging over his AIM issue Hide. TAE. He wore what looked to be a dark blue and gray bodysuit with a green scarf wrapped around his neck and a light gray jacket. He held himself with a sort of calm confidence that had been missing in the other two AIM Nin, despite the fact he was clearly the youngest of the bunch. As the two of them faced off, Hayate gave both teens a once-over before declaring a start to the match and moving away. For several moments both were still as they eyed each other, each looking for the other to make the first move. Finally, the stare down was broken as Samadare rushed forward, closing the short distance between them and letting loose a punch at the redhead's jaw, only for it to be stopped dead as a wall of coarse brown material halted the fist in its tracks. Wide-eyed in surprise, he leapt back, flinging a pair of kunai to cover his retreat, only for the same substance to rise up and force them to a halt before dropping them to the floor. Narrowing his eyes, he removed a scroll from his jacket, summoning a pair of umbrellas from within before tossing the scroll aside. Tossing the umbrellas up into the air, those looking on could only watch in surprise as a literal rain of senbon came pouring down straight at the Suna Nin. His arms crossed over his chest, he didn't even bat an eye as his gourd burst apart, shielding him from the bombardment of projectiles. Wide-eyed Samadare could only look on in shock as the shield, which he could now tell was made of sand of all things, allowed the projectiles to fall to the floor, with the dull thump of metal striking the ground being the only sound heard. "Is that it?" questioned Gaara, his voice a dull monotone to put even the Aburame clan to shame, while the sand came up to tower around him in the shape of a wave. Boring. In an instant the wave of sand had fallen upon the AIM Nin, with a tendril wrapping around his right ankle, pulling him down as he tried to leap away. As that one tendril pulled him down, the rest cascaded quickly, surrounding the AIM Nin and lifting him up into the air while leaving only his head free. Glaring up at his foe, Gaara raised but a single hand out towards him before clenching it into a fist. Instantly the sand reacted, and the sickening sound of the human body imploding could be heard, along with a short wail of anguish as a shower of blood rained down upon the floor before the sand withdrew, allowing the mangled corpse to land on the ground. In the stands, several of the genin shivered at the brutal ending of the match. Most had never seen anything that brutal in their lives, and while others weren't as bad, they were still affected, as could be seen by the widening of eyes or the sweat that had begun to build upon their faces. Among the genin there were only 4 that were not affected in such a way. 2 of them were Temari and Kankuro, who had become used to the sight even if they didn't necessarily like it. The other 2, however, were Fu and Naruto, both of whom had their eyes narrowed upon the redhead as they went over what they had seen. The fact that he could use sand as both a defensive tool and an offensive weapon was a surprise, simply due to the fact that such a thing was unheard of. The fact that he was capable of doing so much without even moving from his position or even uncrossing his arms showed that he would make a tough opponent. All of their thoughts, however, were put to a halt as the next names lit up the board. Akado Yoroi vs Uzumaki Naruto. After they made their way down, Naruto took the time to look over his opponent. Unfortunately, much like his teammate, you couldn't really see much as he was covered head to toe, including a mask and bandana-type Hide. TAE, with a pair of dark-lensed glasses hiding his eyes from view. What he could see, however, was that he stood at about 5 feet 9, and from what he could see of his build had to weigh at least 140.145 pounds. Considering he himself was only bare 5 feet in height but only 90 pounds, it meant that he was at a distinct disadvantage when it came to raw physical ability. That was fine, however, he could handle a bit of a handicap. Hajime. Immediately Yoroi was moving to cover the distance, with Naruto moving to meet him, ducking under the outstretched right hand of his opponent. The blonde got right inside his guard before slamming his fist directly into the older teen's midsection, folding him over. Without even the slightest bit of hesitation, he unleashed an uppercut with his right that slammed directly into the underside of his opponent's jaw, straightening him out, and in the next instant had slammed the sole of his foot right into his sternum, sending him back at least 2 feet before the older nin managed to recover. "So the rumors about your strength are true. This will be fun." said the older genin. In an instant he was dashing back at the blonde, only this time Naruto leapt back, creating a trio of shadow clones while still in the air. Without even a single verbal command, the clones rushed the older nin as soon as their feet touched the ground. Scoffing as they came, Yoroi's hands blazed blue as he grabbed two of the clones by the neck and slammed them into the ground, causing them to disperse in twin plumes of smoke. That, however, still left clone number 3, who chose just that moment to come down with an axe kick, only for the leg to be caught and held for a few seconds before it dispersed as well. Standing to his feet, Yoroi made a show of dusting off his hands before once again launching himself at the blonde, only this burst of speed seemed to be twice as fast, causing the blonde's eyes to widen. Moving on instinct, the blonde ducked under the right hook, wrapped both arms around his opponent's midsection, and surprised everyone including his opponent by actually lifting him into the air before slamming him back first onto the ground, landing on his own knees just to add more power before popping right back up. "Oh, spine buster!" exclaimed Choji with a grimace. "That's it, bring out the stretcher, he's done," exclaimed Kiba, a wolfish grin on his face. "With his body type you forget just how strong he is until he does something like that," said Choji, shaking his head. "Just what the hell was that?" questioned Sasuke, though the question was on the mind of just about everyone including the Junin. "It's called the Spine Buster and is one of a group of grappling techniques that Naruto has created over the years. As for why it has its name, it is quite simple, as the attack targets the opponent's spine. I've only rarely seen anyone get up from something like that," said Shikamaru, surprising everyone who knew him with a serious expression on his face. "Why hasn't he ever used it before then?" questioned Ino. "He has, you've just never been to the underground," said Kiba. "And how do you know of such a place?" demanded Kurenai, glaring at the Inuzuka. "What are you guys talking about?" questioned Sasuke. "The underground. It's a pit where illegal fights happen. It's constantly moving though, so no one's been able to shut it down since it started up," explained Asuma. "And Naruto fought there?" questioned Sakura. "No, he didn't fight there," said Shikamaru, causing her as well as a few others to sigh. "He ruled there for the last 2 years," finished Shikamaru. Before anyone else could comment on that subject, however, they all focused back down on the floor, where even Naruto had stopped his walk towards the steps to turn back and watch as Yoroi managed to climb back to his feet. Eyes wide in surprise at the sight, the blonde blinked before a scowl covered his features as the older nin turned to face him. "You're going to have to do better than that, punk," stated Yoroi. "How the hell are you back up? I've hospitalized people with that move," said the blonde. "That's my secret. More importantly, what will you do now? You've got to be running on empty chakra-wise. After all, the shadow clone technique is quite the chakra-expensive technique. I know Junin that can only barely make 5, you've already made 3. Not to mention you've got to be feeling a little worse for wear now after that move you just pulled. But me, I have more than enough to keep going," stated Yoroi, a dark tone entering his voice. "Why, because you absorbed a little of my chakra?" questioned the blonde, giving everyone pause, including his opponent. "You're right, of course, Kage Bunshin is a chakra-heavy technique, but it has some benefits. For instance, I know my clones weren't dispersed due to damage inflicted, but because the chakra that made them up was disrupted. Also, the chakra that made them up never returned to me. I know that because I didn't receive any memories upon their dispersal. As for me being near empty, that pitiful amount is just a drop in the bucket," said Naruto with a smirk. "Bullshit, kid. I've just taken more chakra from you than I have Junin. Face it, you're done, and now you're dead," said Yoroi. Sighing at that, the blonde shook his head before squaring himself up once more. However, this time he stood straight up with his feet shoulders width apart as he brought his hands together, his left hand grasping onto his right wrist as he extended his arms out towards his opponent. As he took the stance, the Sandaime Hokage watched in shock as he did this and gripped the rails before him tightly as the blonde pointed his index finger out towards his opponent while all the rest of his fingers bar his thumb were tucked in. In the next instant, the blonde's chakra flared to life so much that it was clearly visible as a bright blue dome that surrounded the blonde, forcing many eyes to widen in shock at the sheer amount of chakra that he possessed. Slowly the dome of power was sucked in, leaving only his brightly glowing index finger to be seen to speak of the amount of power he was putting out. "Regan!" With that exclamation, a bright beam of energy about as thick as both his arms when put together was shot from his finger, with Yoroi only just barely getting his hands up in time to block. Despite this, however, the beam still hit him with such force it actually slammed him into a wall and made a crater with his body while still digging into him. Finally the beam cut off, leaving a panting Naruto while showing a sizzling Yoroi who began screaming and thrashing almost as soon as the beam let up. Hayate didn't waste a moment calling for the medics and by default naming Naruto the winner. Naruto, however, wasn't really paying attention. Instead, he was doing his best to massage his finger to get it to stop throbbing. Finally, he felt the pain cease and he made his way slowly up the stairs and to his team before he sat down with his back against the wall. Before anyone could speak up to him, however, the board once more began churning through names, forcing all to give it its due attention. Hyuga Hinata vs. Haruno Sakura. As the two girls made their way down, Hinata was taking the time to mentally prepare herself for the fight. During the time she had been a genin, Kurenai had given her a lot of advice, but the best she'd gotten had come from Kiba of all people. He had told her that if she was uncomfortable then she should be someone else, create a persona that was not only fine with what she did but would flourish doing it. That is exactly what she had set out to do. She had taken all the traits she wished she had and placed them within a persona that she stepped in when it came time to missions. Now as she faced off against her opponent, this was who Sakura was looking upon, not on the shy and meek girl that everyone usually saw, but someone who was calm and confident, who was looking forward to the challenge. Hajime. At his words, Sakura rushed forward, throwing a powerful right hook only for Hinata to dart out of the way. Coming to a stop at her side, Hinata turned and looked at her incredulously. There was absolutely no way that Sakura had just thrown such a civilian-level punch at her. It had to have been a trap. As Sakura turned and raced towards her again, she ran through a quick chain of seals, producing a pair of clones as all three ran down the girl, each throwing the same overhead right punch at her. Guessing that it really hadn't been a trap, Hinata ignored both of the Sakuras coming up on her sides and instead focused on the one coming up from the middle, knocking her fist wide before poking at each of her shoulders with a pair of finger jabs. Immediately both of the Pinkette's arms dropped, but Hinata wasn't through and instead with a blazing Byakugan proceeded to lay into the pink-haired girl, her arms mere blurs while Sakura's body rocked with each strike that the girl delivered on her until finally Hinata stopped and Sakura dropped to the floor like a puppet with its strings cut. Panting slightly from the speed she had moved at, Hinata felt a tension she hadn't even known she was carrying melt off of her as she stepped away and was declared the winner. Of course, she had always held a bit of resentment for the pink-haired girl. Unfortunately, her own she personality had not let her express that, but she had always resented Sakura for having Naruto's attention. She hadn't realized just what she had having Naruto pay her such close attention. But it no longer mattered as he was hers now. Still, it felt good to give her a hit for everyone she had given Naruto in the past. As she made it back up to the rafters and was congratulated by her teammates, the facade fell and her normal shy countenance returned with a vengeance, as made obvious by the atomic blush that stained her cheeks before they all turned their attention back up to the board. Akamichi Choji vs. Aburame Shino. It took a bit of time before they were ready to start, as Asuma had to actually get Choji, and in the end, while he had managed to convince Choji, the fact that he had to bribe the portly genin to take part didn't sit right with him, especially with the looks he received from the other Junin for his trouble. Now as they stood before each other, Hayate spared each of them a look, finding Choji thinking more about food and Shino as stoic as an Aburame could be. Finally he started the match and immediately Choji was in action, running through a few short seals before tucking his limbs into the sleeves of his shirt and shorts, his body growing until he became a large ball that shot straight at the Aburame Heir. Shino didn't even blink as the large mass of rolling flesh that was Choji slammed into him. Instead his body burst apart into a large black shadow that swarmed all over him. Feeling what seemed like millions of things crawling all over him, Choji poured out even more power, his body launching itself at the nearest wall and slamming into it, and when that didn't make it stop he did it again, bouncing from wall to wall, picking up speed each time until finally he landed with a crash on the floor, his body back to normal and him clearly exhausted. At the same time the shadow left Choji and literally flew to a darkened corner of the room where Shino emerged, stepping out of the shadows as the dark mass split up and shot up each of his sleeves. "Winner Aburame Shino," said Hayate after a moment. Quietly making his way back up to the rafters, Shino nodded his thanks to everyone who congratulated him before quietly returning to his place next to his sensei. Finally everyone turned their attention back up to the board as once more it lit up and those remaining watched eagerly to see who would be placed in the last match and who would be lucky enough to avoid it altogether and go straight into the exams. Finally the board stopped displaying a pair of names, causing both to begin moving to the ground while Shikamaru exhaled a sigh of relief that he didn't have to do something so troublesome as fight a girl. Tenten vs. Fu. As they arrived on the ground before him, Hayate took a moment to look over both girls and finding that both appeared ready began the match. Almost immediately Tenten was in motion, leaping back and putting a bit of space between them, making it so that she was not too close yet at the same time not too far from her opponent. Normally this would have been fine, but Fu was having none of it. In an instant she had closed that distance, and in the next Tenten could be seen flying across the room as Fu appeared in the place she'd last been standing. Recovering in mid-air, Tenten flipped herself so that she was right side up and in a single motion launched a trio of shuriken at the Taki. Nin. Fu dodged easily, but Tenten didn't care, as that attack wasn't meant to hit but allow her time to land. Even as she slid to a stop, however, Tenten had to marvel at the other girl's speed. It was unreal. The only person she'd ever seen move faster had been Guy himself. However, her admiration was put on hold as she removed a pair of scrolls from her pouch and set them on the ground. She didn't really want to use this technique, but this girl was simply too fast for her to even think of not using it. Running through a quick chain of seals, she was suddenly enshrouded in smoke before two dragons made of smoke shot up into the air, circling each other before they were revealed to be Tenten's now unraveled scrolls. Appearing in the air in the middle of the rotating scrolls, she bit both of her thumbs before reaching out to each side of her, producing a sai and a comma in each hand before letting them fly. What followed was a rain of metal as Tenten began to spin, sending down all manner of sharp and pointy objects down towards Fu, who did her best to dodge them all, yet Tenten still managed to follow her with the weapons until the rain of metal death abruptly stopped, showing that she ran out of weapons considering they were all currently littering the floor. Fu, however, gritted her teeth seeing she managed to be backed into a corner, and Tenten, still in the air, smirked and pulled her hands back, revealing all the weapons to be tied to chakra strings connected to her fingers, causing them all to lift and hover in the air, pointed directly at the mint-haired kunoichi. Fu, however, didn't panic. Instead, she took a breath, and when she let it out, she screamed. This, however, was no ordinary scream let loose by fear. Instead, this was a high-pitched wail, canary cry, "Don't own," which not only knocked all the weapons and Tenten out of the air, but those more sensitive to the sound like Kiba and Naruto were also forced to their knees, holding their ears in pain, struggling to block the sound. Finally, Fu stopped and all was silent within the room, with the more observant people managing to see that some serious damage had been done to Tenten's collection of weapons as well. Tenten herself had been knocked unconscious. Whether it was from the sound, fall, or a combination of both was up in the air. Seeing this, Hayate had no choice but to name the mint-haired kunoichi as the winner. Impressive. Naruto didn't even twitch at the deep voice that had penetrated through his thoughts. Over the last few days it was something he had gotten used to, though the first time he nearly jumped out of his pants due to the surprise. With the knowledge that he held about the truth of his parents' deaths and the reason for his life, he had found he couldn't hold a grudge with the fox, and the fox in return was grateful that the boy had let him go with no thought of abusing his power, and whose only reservation had been whether he'd live through the process. As such, the two had set into a partnership of sorts. They weren't friends or enemies, but they had a common one that they both wanted dead badly. "She is pretty fast," mused the blonde. "She also has a pretty decent grasp of her abilities." "Gaara too," returned the blonde evenly. "His control isn't that good. Most of what happened with the sand was Shukaku's doing. The only reason he appears so strong is because that overgrown rat has a strong influence," said the fox. Naruto was broken from his conversation with the fox as he heard Hayate call for everyone who won their matches to come to the ground. Once everyone was down, they were stood in a line as Anko went around with a box from which each person removed a piece of paper. Once everyone had a piece, Ibiki called for each person to read what was on the paper, starting from right to left. 3, said Shikamaru. 2, said Kiba. 8, said Hinata. 5, said Shino. 1, said Neji. 10, said Lee. 4, said Tamari. 6, said Kankuro. 11, said Gaara. 7, said Sasuke. 12, said Naruto. 9, Fu. Once Ibiki had everything written down, he eyed his notepad for a moment before nodding, passing it along to a pair of Chunin who immediately got to work copying its contents. While they waited, Hayate reminded the group that they would have a month to train for the third exam due to all of the VIPs that would be attending, before motioning them to look at the Chunin, who turned over a large board for them to see its contents. Hyuga Neji vs. Inazuka Kiba. Nara Shikamaru vs. Tamari. Aburame Shino vs. Kankuro. Uchiha Sasuke vs. Hyuga Hinata. Rock Lee vs. Fu. Gaara vs. Uzumaki Naruto. Once everyone had ample time to look over the board and they had a short Q&A session, they were dismissed and none of them could get out of there fast enough. Naruto knew he had his work cut out for him for the next month, but at the moment all he wanted was to take a shower, a nap, and go to Ichiraku's. Everything else could wait. As the door to his apartment closed behind him, Naruto let out a relieved breath. Even after being granted access to the Senju compound, he had steadfastly refused to leave his apartment. The Masaki clan members were unaware of this until Sandame clarified that it was his parents' residence, at which point Azusa closed the case and acquired the entire structure. He'd given the blonde the deed and promised to pay for any renovations he wanted to do before he left. After outlining the circumstances in a letter to Dazuna, Naruto was happy to receive his response, which promised to send someone to inspect the location. Naruto was determined to maintain his apartment in its original state, regardless of any renovations that might take place. He might replace the kitchenette's floorboards and install new carpet, but that was about all the changes he planned to make. After clearing his head, he quickly went to the bathroom, turned on the shower, and let the water warm up. He also quickly grabbed a towel from his closet. He quickly made his way to his bedroom to get a change of clothes, and after a short while, he was able to relax as the water soothed his sore and bruised muscles. He took a few moments to reflect on everything he had witnessed during the preliminary round as he stood beneath the water's spray. Based on his observations thus far, he would receive harsh treatment from both Lee and Neji. From what he could see, Rock Lee was lightning fast, and his taijutsu technique was nothing to laugh at. Nevertheless, he and Lee had a history of frequent run-ins and even developed a strong underground rivalry. Since it was against the law to use chakra, Lee had actually had the upper hand there, but the Chunin tournament would be his chance to truly shine since he could utilize his greatest advantage, his enormous chakra pools. Neji, his teammate, had demonstrated why he was referred to as the strongest genin in the village in addition to being a prodigy among his clan, despite the fact that he was probably not as quick. In addition to being fairly swift, he was able to deal even more damage than usual because of his taijutsu, which he used to directly target his opponent's internal organs and chakra network. He would also have to test the effects of the Kirigakure no Jutsu because his Byakugan would negate the usefulness of most shinobi tricks. Neji was another person he had seen in the subterranean, and if there was one thing he knew about the Hyuga, it was that, in addition to being vicious, he was also constantly on the lookout for any sign of weakness and would not think twice about taking advantage of it. He would also need to be cautious around Suna Kunoichi Tamari, who had shown to be a competent wind user but, more importantly, had not demonstrated much of her potential against Ino. He would like to think that Shikamaru would defeat her, but given his knowledge of the Nara Heir, he reasoned that he would only take the necessary steps to win and gain his promotion before giving up and letting Tamari go. As a Hyuga, Hinata posed a threat in close-quarters combat. But Sasuke was her opponent, and Kakashi was confident that Teme would have a strategy other than his arsenal of fire techniques to defeat her, having already told the team that he would be taking over Sasuke's training at the council's request. However, since Hinata belonged to the Hyuga clan and the Uchiha clan had grown rivalry over time, he wouldn't be shocked if Hiyashi himself actively participated in her training. But Gaara and Fu were the most dangerous participants of all. Gaara was obviously unstable, and he could manipulate sand, of all things, in very useful ways. Conversely, Fu had hardly displayed anything except for the fact that her wail was more painful than the combined greatest fangirl screams of Sakura and Ino. The Fox claimed that both of them were Jinchuriki and that they were obviously aware of the advantages that accompanied that responsibility. Even though the Fox had suggested that he might have certain skills, it had not provided any concrete details, so he was unable to brag about having such a thing. Naturally, the Fox didn't say much at all and gave the blonde the impression that he was being tested right then. 30 minutes afterward, he came out of the restroom, steam pouring from his exhaust. He was wearing a white tank top, gray cotton sweatpants, and black slip on sandals that he reserved for his apartment. But as he came out, he stopped when he saw that 4 individuals had broken into his apartment. Sasami, Yoshi, and Irie weren't too bad. They came and went as they pleased. It was the 4th person, though, who completely stopped him. Forget the fact that, as far as he knew, he had never seen the man before and that, despite appearing to be carefree as he lounged on his couch, something far more significant had brought him to his attention. The blonde eyebrow twitched dangerously and said, "My ramen." The man remarked, making Yosho and Irie both sigh, "Ha, definitely Kushina's kid, find a strange man in the house and the most important thing is that I'm eating your ramen." The blonde smiled, pleased with the comparison. "So, what's going on?" asked the ginger. Naruto instantly straightened up when Irie said, "We wanted to inform you of what will be happening for the next month leading up to the finals." Jiraiya was the next to speak. "For the next month I'll be in charge of your training. First and foremost we will be traveling to a location outside of the village where your training will be held. There you will be put through more advanced taijutsu, chakra control, and ninjutsu training. You will also be signing the Toad summoning contract, and I will begin instructing you in fuinjutsu. Finally, I want to get you started on learning to control the Kyuubi's chakra. Jiraiya continued. I will likewise continue your kenjutsu lessons as well as your etiquette lessons, while Irie will work to continue your general education in preparation for our departure. The blonde asked, and when are we supposed to start with this? Realizing that she had a lot of work ahead of her, Jiraiya said, tossing the blonde a scroll that he recognized as the storage scroll containing his equipment. Right now we were just waiting for you to get out of the shower. The blonde man turned to go back to his room and said, fine, let me get dressed. Sakura sighed, picturing herself collapsing onto her bed as soon as she entered her house. She'd been confined to the hospital for several hours following the severe kicking she'd received from Hinata because the doctors couldn't treat her until her tenketsu opened. She would have suffered more if the doctors had forced her tenketsu open, even though they could have treated her. They determined that, even though it would take longer, it would be simpler and less painful for her to allow her own chakra to naturally open her tenketsu because her injuries weren't particularly serious. She had a few hours to reflect while lying on the bed because her mother had always advised her to take being a kunoichi seriously if she wanted to follow this path. She believed that was what she had been doing after leaving the academy, so she started doing 50 push-ups and sit-ups every day, 25 in the morning and an additional 25 at night. She believed she was doing well because she consistently completed the exercises Kakashi assigned her during team training. Though Hinata had demonstrated, she hadn't really seen much because Hinata had beaten her and her body had only been responding to the blows from the other girl. If that wasn't enough, she was really forced to assess the situation after realizing how far Naruto had come in only a few months. After all, he had gone from being easily defeated in the academy to dominating Sasuke as if their roles had been reversed and exuding so much chakra that it was actually visible all around him. She was interrupted from her thoughts when she looked up and saw her parents clearly packing and moving around the room. She was almost exactly like her mother, Haruno Mebuki, who was 5 feet 6 inches and had long pink hair that fell to the end of her back. Her eyes were brown, which was one of the few differences between her and her mother, and she was obviously much more mature in the development area with her curvy figure and large C-cup breast. Although it wouldn't be obvious from looking at her, she was a Chunin-ranked shinobi, currently in charge of the shinobi library, by trade, a librarian, which accounted for Sakura's infatuation with books. At 5 feet 8 inches, her father Haruno Kazashi was just a few inches taller than her. He had blue eyes and long red hair that was arranged like a cherry blossom. As he made his way downstairs to the house's first floor, he was now carrying 3 travel bags. Seeing as how she was standing in front of the door, he was the first to notice her. He quickly got her down and took her in his arms, although he handled her carefully since he was clearly aware of her injuries. So what's going on? The genin asked after being set upright. Well, your mother decided that we're going to be taking a little trip. While everyone else was sleeping, Jiraiya took a deep, soothing breath and stood where he was. Based on the sun's position, it took them 3 hours to arrive at their current location, and he had to admit, if only to himself, that he was impressed. Yosho, Irie, and Sasami were able to keep up with him as he had paced himself at the normal speed of a chunin. However, because of the current route they had to follow, the 2 females were currently taking advantage of the chance to rest. Though Jiraiya knew it extended farther, they were surrounded by forest on all sides. In front of them, however, was a step hill with stone steps leading up it for approximately 3 miles. Jiraiya led the group as they ascended the stairs slowly and deliberately after deciding they had had enough time to rest. He used their stroll as an opportunity to tell the blonde some stories about his late student and his wife, to which the blonde listened intently. Ultimately, after climbing the stairs for almost an hour, the group was met with the sight of 2 enormous gates that were closed at the time. Upon observing the gates, they realized they were identical to those at Konoha's main entrance, and as such, they easily towered over them. Jiraiya simply approached the gates and struck them in the center with his palm in an instant, without pausing. The impact was instantaneous. Not only did the sound of flesh hitting wood resound, but the gates also suddenly opened, leaving Sasami, Irie, and Naruto gaping open, mouthed and wide-eyed, while Yosho, who was able to keep his composure, still had wide eyes. The group was welcomed by a spacious temple as soon as the gates opened, which truly gave Yosho a sense of belonging. Glancing around, they discovered that the view directly in front of them was truly breathtaking, as the location was evidently well kept. The ground was raised approximately 6 inches on all sides of them, revealing solid ground in place of grass. What Yosho assumed to be the lecture hall was off to the right, and the stone path they were currently standing on led up from the staircase to the foot of the main hall. A voice that caught everyone's attention said, "Well, you certainly took your sweet time getting here." When the group looked up in the direction it came from, they saw an elderly woman who was maybe 5 feet 3 inches. She had brown eyes and shoulder-length hair that had long since turned gray, but still had some pink in it. She was wearing brown eyes and a pair of white pants and a long-sleeved white shirt, over which she had a deep red robe that was tied closed with a green obi that matched the green trim on the outer edge of the robe beautifully. Finally, she was wearing purple close-toed shoes that only reached her ankles, but they matched the purple trim on the upper portion of the robe's inner edges perfectly. "Well, come on in, slacker, and you can introduce the extras you decided to bring," the elderly lady replied. A short while later, he discovered the group gathered in an empty room inside the main building. The woman had sat herself down on the floor in the center of the room, cross-legged, while the others had also found a place to sit. As he sat down, Naruto was examining the woman. She reminded him of the Sandaime because, despite their similar ages, both of them exuded a subtle presence as if they were just harmless old people, but Naruto knew better. He recalled a time years prior, when he had been with the old man, and something had happened. The old man hadn't said a word, but the atmosphere around him had changed, and instead of being terrified like everyone else, Naruto had been filled with awe. "Well, slacker, mind telling me who these people are, and why you brought them here?" The woman replied. "Sensei, of course." Jiraiya stated, "The man is Masaki Yosho, and the woman is his wife Masaki Airi. The young girl is his sister Sasami. Kushina's parents are here. I guess I can pardon you for bringing them here in this particular case," the woman said, causing Jiraiya to exhale. "This one is definitely young Naruto because he resembles Minato at that age nearly exactly." The woman remarked, "Even though he has a different facial structure and slightly darker hair, it still feels like stepping back in time. Could you please tell me how you are related to Minato?" "San?" asked Yosho. The woman said, "He was my son." Naruto's eyes widened in disbelief. "If such is the case, why wasn't Naruto raised by you here?" asked Airi. "That is a pretty involved response. The most obvious explanation, though, is that the hidden villages think I'm dead." "My name is Tatsuki Miyako, that's my true name," the woman began. "The heiress of the Tatsuki clan, I thought you looked familiar," replied Yosho. Airi said, her head collapsing into her hands in shock, "I can't believe this. The Galaxy Police have been looking for you for nearly 600 years, and you mean to say you've been on this planet the entire time?" "Well, my ship is still on Jirai, so it's not like I could leave. In addition, my mother was from here, so I like it here," the woman said, shrugging her shoulders. Still, Naruto was supposed to be raised here. In fact, that was the plan. However, from what I understand, when Jiraiya tried to bring him here under the guise of taking him in himself, the village council denied it, stating that he was a very important figure for the village and couldn't just leave. Furthermore, they wouldn't let a Jinchuriki, a newly born one, at that live outside of their village. He also could not come outright and say he was bringing the baby to me, as no one there knew who I was. Also, due to other factors, we couldn't even announce his heritage in order to protect him from his parents' enemies. So instead I, through Jiraiya, have taken care of all of his expenses, which was the most I could do with my hands tied," stated the woman. "Now then, Jiraiya, from my understanding he should be only just exiting the academy a few months ago, so why have you brought him here now and not after his first year of service as planned?" questioned Miyako. "A few reasons. Firstly, when they came to the Leaf they made no attempt to hide their origins and as such revealed Kushina's. Following this, Sarutobi Sensei decided to reveal the full scope of Naruto's heritage, so I figured I may as well knock this last revelation out while we were at it. Finally, there is one last reason. Recently he had the Kyuubi removed from the seal, however after a scan covertly done by a medic, Nin Kakashi found out that he has an imbalance in his chakra with a ratio of 65 to 35 in favor of his yang chakra, so we put the Kyuubi's power core back in as a sort of band-aid solution. Finally, from what Sensei explained, the Gaki actually used a Raigun during the Chunin exam preliminaries. With an imbalance like you're saying, it should be utterly impossible for him to use that technique even if it is a basic technique. Also from what I know, Minato only sealed the Yang chakra into Naruto, so only that kind of chakra has been added to his system. We'll have to do a transfusion to balance out his chakra though, and I'm guessing we'll be using the rest of the month as training time for the main exam," stated Miyako, getting a nod from the Sannin. "Alright, I'll prepare a room for the procedure. In the meantime, show them to some rooms of their own," stated Miyako as she got up and left the room. "Well, Gaki, you took that better than I thought," said Jiraiya as he turned to look at the blonde who didn't respond. "Naruto-kun?" questioned Sasami, tapping the blonde only for him to fall over. He had fainted with his eyes open. Elsewhere, another old man could be seen at his desk with a huge stack of papers placed upon it. In appearance he was very short, with a triangular beard and a mustache that has angular corners, a big red nose and thick eyebrows. The top of his head is completely bald, although he has long white hair on the lower half of his head, which is styled in a traditional Chanmage haircut, the back of which is tied with a yellow ribbon into a topknot. He wore a green and yellow coat with a red collar underneath, which he wears the standard outfit consistent with his village except with a light green version of the village's flak jacket and mesh armor. He however has both his sleeves of his shirt, but kept the single lapel on his right side. This man was the Sandaime Tsuchikage known as Ryodanben no Onoki. At the moment he was looking upon a missive that had arrived not 5 minutes ago by way of Konoha and from the Sandaime Hokage of all people. Over the years he had come to respect his counterpart, still hated him and wouldn't hesitate to kill him, but he respected the man. You couldn't live through all 3 great shinobi wars as the two of them had and not come to respect others that had did the same, and fought on the front lines. The missive itself explained that a leaders' summit was to be held in Konoha on the day following the Chunin exam final tournament, the subject matter of which could determine the future of not just the hidden villages but the entire world. As such, not only were the 5 Kages to attend, but so were the daimyo of all the countries and the heads of the minor villages and countries. He narrowed his eyes, seeing 2 specific names requested to come as part of his entourage. What the hell are you thinking? Furthermore, what's so important that the whole of the elemental nations need to be involved? The old man thought to himself. The truth of the matter was there had never been a full gathering of all of the world's leaders under one roof. It was rare just to see the 5 Kages all gathered together. In fact, it had only happened once during the era of the Shodais. It had been that meeting that determined the 5 great villages, as each of the villages would command at least one of the Biju. Frowning, he set about writing a few missives of his own, at least thankful he'd be able to leave the paperwork for a while. Later that night found Sarutobi Hiruzen sitting within his office with a serious frown adorning his features. Across from him stood Kakashi calmly, though with his book conspicuously absent from his hand. At the moment, the masked Junin had just finished informing him of some of the troubles that had befallen on him during the day, these being Yakushi Kabuto's attempted murder and the inability of anyone being able to find him, a search he himself had been participating in along with several squads of Anbu members. For the duration of the training break, I want you to take Sasuke out of the village and train him, stated Hiruzen after several moments of thought. While I understand the motive for that, what about Sakura? The original plan was for me to focus my attention on her and Sasuke equally this month while Naruto's off with Jiraiya, stated Kakashi. True enough, however, Haruno Mebuki has requested the month off for her entire family so she and Kazashi could work on Sakura's training themselves. They'll be leaving in the morning. That Kakashi could understand, as it was not unheard of for parents to request time to personally train their children, and in Sakura's case he could definitely see her benefiting from the training. While not Junin level, her parents were actually well known in their respective fields. Mebuki specialized in barrier techniques and had been so skilled in the area she had been placed on the village's barrier squad, which due to their job duties and importance paid out like a continuous S-ranked assignment. Kazashi, on the other hand, was one of the best kenjutsu practitioners in the village, second only to Gekio Hayate in the art, however was only ranked Chunin due to the fact that he'd yet to master his elemental chakra. Currently the man was on the reserve list due to the fact that he was covering for his own father as the head of the Merchants Guild after the man had a heart attack a few months ago. I see. I'll collect Sasuke as soon as the medics clear him, said Kakashi, getting a nod, a clear dismissal before he left. The morning found Sasami, Yosho, Irie, Jiraiya and Miyako up in shock and a bit of awe as the 6th member of the group, young Naruto, went about as a blur. Everywhere they looked they could see copies of the blonde at work, many of them running or trying to run the surface of the surrounding trees. Unknown to them, Naruto had also sent clones out to explore, and many of them had stumbled upon a beach to which they had taken to training the water walking technique. Despite this, none of them had awoken due to noise made. Instead, it had been the level and the pure potency of his power that had forced their attention upon him. The procedure had been a true success. Unknowing of his audience, the real Naruto stood still as he took it all in. When he'd first woken up, he'd felt better than he had ever felt in his life. After emerging from the temple, he decided to get a bit of early morning training in and went to create some clones, only to create 400, whereas before, even at his max, he could only make around 150. Even still, these clones were different. Whereas before they would dispel with even the slightest bit of damage, these were taking some serious damage to dispel. He hadn't even felt one dispel until it lost control of its chakra and blasted off from a tree and smashed its leg against another one, which ended up breaking the limb and dispelling the clone. Before that, it had witnessed others having things happen yet not dispelling even when they were scratched enough to draw blood. In fact, the wound would just heal right up. His attention was soon pulled in another direction when an extremely thick sheet of fog appeared seemingly from out of nowhere from deeper in the forest, causing his eyes to widen. In the forest, when he'd used the move during the second exam, it had taken some time to gather enough mist just for that small clearing, yet this mist had rolled in like a breeze and was even covering the majority of the massive trees that surrounded him. Thinking to himself for a moment, Naruto held out his hand and concentrated, getting immediately yet unexpected results. Instead of the hand-sized ball of power that had taken him forever just to create once in Nami no Kuni, this time he got a gargantuan sphere big enough to contain a man larger than even Jiraiya that he was forced to hold over his head. "Holy shit, dude!" exclaimed one of the clones, stopping what it was doing and gaping with a dropped jaw in action. Many of the others copied. Looking up at the massive ball, Naruto let his control slip from the top, immediately causing the giant sphere to rupture, the amount of power inside forming a giant tornado that stood and spun for nearly a minute, ripping the unprepared clones from their positions and forcefully dispelling them as they were ripped apart once sucked inside before the thing faded. "Alright Gaki, I think that's enough messing around, don't you?" called Jiraiya, catching the blonde's attention. "Okay, what did you guys do? I've never had this much power before," said Naruto as he made his way up. "It's not that you didn't have it, but that you couldn't use it. Your chakra imbalance was very lopsided, with it basically being almost completely physical. Because of this and the nature of chakra and jutsu, it caused you to force out more chakra in order to get jutsu to work, and even then not at their full potential. Think of it as if you had been carrying weights on you your entire life without any knowledge of it. It forces the muscles to grow stronger, but you're still straining to use them. Now that your chakra ratio has been fixed, it's like removing the weights, and after giving your body a bit of time to relax, you start moving at full speed, whereas before you were moving at half that speed," explained Miyako. If he would have been the same person he was in the academy, that explanation would have flown right over his head. Instead, with the knowledge he had gained, he was easily able to understand it and simply nodded that understanding. Before anyone else could speak, however, Naruto found Jiraiya standing in front of him just as someone new burst onto the scene, leaping out of the trees in a blur only to slide to a stop in an instant. Looking over the woman, Naruto found himself raising a curious eyebrow at the disturbingly familiar-looking woman, though he was sure he'd never seen her before. "Mom," called another voice, one that he actually was familiar with. True enough, not several moments later emerged the familiar form, his Kunoichi teammate, along with another person, this one a man who was fingering the hilt of a sword. Pushing past Jiraiya, he stood forward, causing Sakura to blink in shock. At the same time, Naruto was also a bit shocked as he realized why the other woman had seemed so familiar. She was an older, hotter version of Sakura. "Naruto? What in the world are you doing here?" questioned Sakura. "I was going to ask you the same thing. I was told not many people knew about this place," said the blonde evenly. "Well, it seems the entire family is here. Let's talk inside," said Miyako. Several minutes later found the large group once again gathered within the same room within the main building they had gathered in the previous day, only now with the addition of Sakura and who she had introduced as her parents. For a while no one said anything as the Haruno family settled themselves while the members of Clan Masaki watched them curiously. "I wish the lot of you would have let me know you were all coming up here," stated Miyako with a sigh. "Well, I wasn't planning on it until I got word of how Sakura did in the Chunin exams and decided it was time she got more hands-on training," stated the older Sakura. "I see. I suppose it's good you came anyway. At least I can get this out of the way. I'd like to introduce the three of you to Masaki Yosho, his wife Heir, and his sister Sasami. The white-haired man is my old student Jiraiya of the Sannin, and you already know of young Naruto here, I'm sure," stated Miyako. "I'm sorry, but how could that young girl be your sister? You look old enough to be her grandfather," said Mebuki only to be shocked as Yosho's image wavered and in his place was a much younger man. Well, the truth of the matter is I'm not that much older than her and I've gotten rather used to keeping up my illusion, stated Yosho calmly. It's been quite a few years since I've seen you, Mebuki, stated Jiraiya. You as well, Jiraiya. Sama, I'm glad to see you in good health, stated the woman. How exactly do you know her? Questioned Naruto as he turned to the sage. Well, she and your father were actually quite close, so close in fact that he called her his sister, stated Jiraiya, shocking the blonde. That isn't just a saying, Minato and Mebuki are twins, stated Miyako, shocking everyone. Wait, what? Questioned Naruto, turning to the elder woman. I never said Minato was my only child. Hiruzen assumed that and I made no move to correct him. The two of them being fraternal twins meant that the subject of their relation was never brought up, as really the two of them don't look anything alike. While Mebuki, as you can all see, received her looks from me, Minato is a mix of my father and his father, explained Miyako. Wait, what are you talking about? You've never mentioned our father, said Mebuki. With good reason. Because I didn't and Hiruzen knew to keep his mouth shut. The two of you got to lead your own lives, stated Miyako. So their situation was just like my own. Hidden and as such not forced into the shadows of their father, stated Naruto. Indeed, not only would they have had to deal with being known as children of the Nidaime Hokage but as heirs to the Senju clan, stated Jiraiya, shaking his head. Wait, didn't Sandaime Sama say that Yondaime Sama was the son of the Nidaime? But if that's the case and he is actually my mom's brother, then that would make me and Naruto, stated Sakura with wide shocked eyes. Indeed, the two of you are cousins, stated Miyako. But in that same vein it would make Sakura an heir of Jirai, stated Naruto. Okay, where did that leap in logic come from? Questioned Kazashi with narrowed eyes. It is no leap, but an actual fact. As I told all of you, there are many secrets buried in my past. For instance, the reason that you Mebuki were able to attend school within the capital with the children of the Fire Daimyo is because at one point I worked training the bodyguards of the Daimyo. At that point I went by the name of Genkei, and it was during that time that I met Tobirama. However, before that, before I became stranded and forced to live on this planet, I was called by my true name of Tatsuki Miyako, and I am the heiress of one of Jiraiya's 4 noble clans, stated Miyako. Okay, I'm confused, stated Mebuki. Not surprising. Not long ago the council was made aware of certain things and the majority of it was classified by Hokage Sama's law as an S-class secret. As you know, such secrets are punishable by death. However, as this secret now concerns our family, I suppose I can share it with you. From the information packets we received, it was revealed that Jirai is a planet far from our own, which is considered to be the center of civilization, which controls several galaxies worth of planets, stated Kazashi. Okay, are there any more revelations that need to be revealed? Any more long-lost relatives I need to know about? Anybody? Last chance for more life-altering news here. No, good. I've got training to do, honestly. With that, the blonde got up and left the room, all the while everyone could only sweat drop as the boy muttered all the way out the door. Well, he took all this better than I thought he would, stated Jiraiya after a few moments, only for a loud explosion to suddenly rock the place. 10 minutes later, the large group came outside to find the blonde laughing as he was lay sprawled out on the ground and a large tongue went about licking his face. Okay, you caught me, Ayame. Chan, get off, called the boy, only for the large hellhound to lick him once more before moving back and allowing him to sit up. While most wouldn't be able to tell the three creatures apart, it was quite easy for him to do so. The trick was all in the eyes, as Ayame had violet eyes, Kamiko had red eyes, and the third, whom he named Haku, had blue eyes. The group could only watch as the large beast circled around him before lying down and resting its head in his lap. As the group moved to approach, the beast only opened a single eye and looked at them before closing it again. Taking that as a sign to approach, they stopped dead as two more emerged from out of the forest. However, Irie and Sasami didn't stop, and soon they too were sitting comfortably petting one of Naruto's pet hellhounds on the head. Kazashi himself found the sight odd as he remembered watching the three of them pin down a trio of Anbu with ease during a council meeting. Sakura's first memory of them, however, was much more memorable, as it was full of blood and body parts, and as such made her extremely weary of the creatures. Oi Gaki, break time's over, called Jiraiya, getting the blonde's attention. So how's this going to work? questioned the blonde, not moving from his seated position as everyone else gathered around him. Well, for one thing, Gaki, as you've demonstrated earlier, we need to get your chakra back under control and if possible improve it even further. Also, Kakashi has made me aware of what he's been teaching you taijutsu-wise, and we'll further that training as well, as Kakashi was only allowed to learn the basics of that style. Along with taijutsu, we're going to be working on improving your speed and strength, and we'll start you on some basic fuinjutsu. Finally, we'll be working to expand your catalog of ninjutsu, explained Jiraiya. Back within the village, the devil princess of Jirai, Kimiki Seto. Jirai sat with an elegant poise as she took a sip of tea. Across from her sat Hyuga Hiyashi, the head of the Hyuga clan, along with 2 members of his clan's elder council. Sitting the cup of tea down, she regarded them calmly, their emotionless mask doing little to unsettle her as she placed her hands in her lap. Lady Kimiki, by your presence here I assume that our proposal has been looked over, stated one of the elders. Indeed it has, and after a discussion between himself and Hinata-san, Naruto has agreed to accept her as a bride, stated Seto. Well then, there is only the discussion of the tribute to be made to marry into the clan, stated another elder, causing the woman to raise an eyebrow. You misunderstand. While Naruto has indeed accepted her, your contract has not been signed, stated Seto, causing all the Hyugas to pause. First and foremost, you should understand that Naruto will not be marrying into your clan. Instead, Hinata will be marrying into his. As such, upon their union she will take the Masaki name as her own, unless they are here, in which case they will use the Uzumaki name. Your name and status, while having significant importance here, means nothing within the vastness of the Jirai Empire. The name Masaki means everything, as it is the name of not only the founder of Jirai and our empire but the name of the current emperor, and in all truthfulness it is your status that is being raised. Second, the bloodline protection seal you wanted to have placed on Hinata, Sarutobi. Dono has told us all about it, and I will tell you now that there is no way that it will be placed on her or any of her children. As it stands, Naruto has a very high chance of taking the throne once our current emperor steps down. With that in mind, we cannot allow his wife to be subservient to anyone in any way, shape or form. Furthermore, slavery has been outlawed throughout the entirety of the empire, and while we do not like to interfere with the goings-on of other places too much, the relationship this clan would have to Clan Masaki, and as such Jirai will be under much scrutiny. As such, if you wish this union to take place, all of the seals must be removed. Preposterous, there is no way we can do such a thing. That seal is the only thing, started one of the elders, only to be cut off as Seto suddenly glowered, all pleasantness gone from her features. Let's get this straight. That abomination isn't meant to protect your bloodline as you like to claim, otherwise all of you would have won. Now instead, that is a marking of forced subjugation, of slavery, and something your Hokage hasn't been able to deal with due to the laws put in place by your village's founders. The truth of the matter, however, is you aren't so much worried about the protection of a bloodline, but you are worried of the repercussions of your actions coming back to hit you once those poor people are free of your control over them. That, however, would be a problem of your own making, and I won't allow your problems to place a stain on the reputation of the Imperial House of Jirai, something I have spent the last 1,000 years to build up. You have created a negative situation, you will fix it in the appropriate manner or all talks between us will cease. Good day, gentlemen. With that, the Devil Princess rose from her seat and with the grace of someone of her stature left the room, leaving 4 startled Hyuga clan members in her wake. Meanwhile, within the meeting room of another clan compound, Inuzuka Sume paced back and forth through the room while a few members of her own council watched her go. Unlike other clans, the Inuzuka were a lot more rowdy, and as such they didn't have any type of seat or table within the room, as moving around helped them once they got agitated, which Sume clearly was. I don't get it. As far as suitors go, Hana is a jackpot. Not only is she an heiress, but she's a damn chunin, so obviously she can take care of herself. Hell, they've interacted enough times where you should have a decent feel of her character over the years, and I don't even have to mention her looks, ranted the woman as she paced. For their part, the council members simply watched her, not even bothering to hide their amused looks. Unlike with the Hyuga clan, the Inuzuka council didn't have much sway in the operations of the clan. In fact, they were more of a body for their alpha to field ideas with. Sure, they helped with the day-to-day operations of the clan, but at the end of the day the final decision always rested with the alpha. That was pack mentality. Also, unlike a lot of clans, they didn't gain their leaders due to succession. Instead, it was the member with the most bite to back up their bark that was eventually elevated to the position of alpha. Sume, despite her relatively small size compared to her male counterparts, had been a shoe-in, as her time as a genin under Jiraiya had put spotlights on her from an early age, and she had eventually become the single most vicious member of their clan, even if she wasn't the strongest physically. Well, according to the missive we received, it is due to his relationship, or rather the lack of relationship in regards to our partners, stated one of the council members, Hideki. Hideki had the rather obvious appearance of an Inuzuka clan member with short-cut but spiky black hair and feral-looking brown eyes. The clan markings on each side of his face added to his feral-like appearance, and he had a rather strong build, standing at 5 feet 10 inches with a torso that was bulging with muscles. Not surprising, most animals are wary of him, stated another, this one female, Kage. She had spiky brown hair that fell to her shoulders along with the clan's signature feral eyes and clan markings. She was only a few inches shorter than Sume at 5 feet 1 inch, and there was a running joke that you should add another 2 feet for her attitude. It's because of his chakra, stated another of the counselors, bringing attention to himself. What do you mean? Questioned Sume. As you all know, animals, whether trained or untrained, have a better feeling for chakra than humans. Gorodomaru ran across him once and told me it was like the boy's chakra was literally clashing inside of his body. He said it was like being back in the Third Shinobi War all over again, explained Hideki. You don't believe that's the real reason, do you? Questioned a different counselor. What are you thinking, Jin? Questioned Sume. Unlike the others, Jin didn't have the standard feral-like appearance of an Inuzuka. His father had married someone from outside of the clan, and as a result Jin had been born with features similar to her own. For instance, his black hair was not shaggy or spiky naturally, but he kept it cut short so that it came up in spikes. His eyes were not slanted but round, and his temperament was actually much more reserved than the norm for an Inuzuka. With his mother's influence, he had developed a fondness for reading at an early age and had become fascinated with mystery stories to the point that his own deductive skills had actually flourished, as he had developed an eye for detail. With that and the keen senses gifted to him as an Inuzuka, he was always able to find anyone or anything he was after. It was for that reason she had not been surprised when he had been invited to join the intelligence division, a first for their clan. While it may be true that our partners don't initially take well to his presence, Akamaru is proof enough that it is something they are able to get used to. That pup doesn't so much as twitch in his presence anymore, stated Jin, giving each of the others pause as they remembered the shivering, whimpering mess the pup had been after his initial meeting with Naruto. Now what if I told you his reasoning was something much different for turning down our offer of Hana, something that in normal situations would not be looked at as favorably as his given reason? Stated Jin, now having everyone's attention. What could it be then? Questioned Kage with a frown. Kiba. Stated Jin, simply causing Sume to narrow her eyes. The relationship between Naruto and Kiba, as well as Akamichi Choji and Nara Shikamaru, is much closer than they allow it to appear in public, stated Jin, elaborating a bit. Go on, said Sume, her curiosity piqued. In no time at all a week had passed and Jiraiya had to admit that he was impressed, all things considered. He had always considered Minato as something special, a once-in-a-generation genius when it came to the shinobi arts, but Naruto was proving to have just as much if not even more potential than Minato had. With Minato things had seemed to come to him easy after a bit of time and he had never required much instruction. Naruto, however, was the type of student teachers would kill for. First and foremost, he wanted to learn and had no problem letting it be known, and it wasn't just ninjutsu he was after. Instead, everything he touched he went at it with 100% focus. It showed a hunger that not many possessed. The problem with most shinobi now was that they just wanted to be good. Even the clan heirs would settle for good. Naruto didn't want to be good or even great, instead he wanted to be the greatest. As such, in just that one short week he had gone from novice to a decent seal maker capable of creating storage scrolls and explosive tags without problem and even improving the designs. His chakra control had improved by leaps and bounds, as had his taijutsu, and though Miyako was not giving many details, the fact that she was giving positive feedback at all was enough. Jiraiya hadn't actually started teaching him any new jutsu at that point. Instead, he had made the boy go back over all the ones he knew, as with his new balance of chakra he had been pouring way too much power into the moves. As it was, Naruto had finally gotten his control to a level where he was able to use the moves in the way they were supposed to be used, and not in ridiculously overpowered ones that would most likely kill him once he decided to try and use it. As such, Jiraiya felt now was as good a time as any to begin ninjutsu training. Alright Gaki, the first technique I'm going to teach you is classified as a C rank. Despite the low ranking, however, the jutsu is a rare one, and in all actuality it is a game changer. As he finished speaking, Jiraiya bit his thumb and Naruto's eyes widened as with a few quick seals the sage slammed his hands to the ground and vanished in a cloud of smoke. Swiftly the smoke was blown away to show the man standing atop of a very large toad. The toad had orange skin is covered in blue markings with bandages wrapped around its body and left foreleg, along with a necklace with 7 large beads on it, with the kanji for loyalty on the central, largest one. All in all, Naruto thought the massive toad was cool, especially as it was orange and orange was still awesome. Alright Gaki, this is Gamma, the holder of the toad summoning contract. As should be obvious, the first technique I'm going to teach you is the Kachiyose no Jutsu. At the words, the toad dropped the scroll which had been held secure by its tongue. As it hit the ground, Naruto was surprised slightly as it unrolled so that an empty slot rested in front of him before it just stopped moving. Looking the thing over, he saw that it actually had quite a few names written in it, though the ones that took the most notice were Jiraiya's and the last one, which was his father's. Following Jiraiya's direction, he bit into his right thumb enough to draw blood and quickly went about writing his name, Uzumaki Naruto, in the scroll, along with placing down his handprint as well. Alright Gaki, I know you already know the basics as I've seen you summon those 3 dogs of yours. However, the difference is that the amount of chakra vary for each class and size of summon. Give it a try, let's see what you can do, stated Jiraiya before taking several steps back. For several long moments Naruto was still as he slowly built up his chakra. In his training to better control the well of energy he had at his disposal, he had discovered that it was often better to take his time with things instead of just rushing in as he was used to. At this point his control was leaps and bounds better than it had ever been, but even still he didn't want to risk overpowering this jutsu and summoning something too big for the space they were occupying. Finally, however, he determined he'd collected a decent amount of chakra, and after biting his thumb once more sped through the quick chain of seals before slamming his hand to the ground and releasing the chakra in the same instant. Immediately there was a large cloud of smoke that appeared that covered him from view, only for it to quickly be blown away. As the smoke cleared, it revealed a large toad standing before him that was a dark orange color and had on a pair of metal bracers on its forelimbs and a metal chest and back plate for armor, causing Jiraiya to whistle. Not bad Gaki, first try and you summoned Gumahiko, and here I thought you would summon a tadpole or something, stated Jiraiya. In another area of the property, Miyako sat calmly as she overlooked a group of Naruto clones at work. Spread out were 16 clones, 8 on either side of her, all of them balancing on the tip of a needle using only a single finger. She could tell quite a few of them were glaring at her heatedly, but she didn't let it faze her. Instead, she merely moved her chopsticks from the bowl in her lap and elevated the ramen they held to her mouth. How much longer do we have to do this? Questioned one of the clones, gritting its teeth. Well, about 2 hours have passed, so 10 more hours to go, stated the woman, causing all of the clones to whimper. Hearing this sound caused something deep within her being to glow with warmth. It had been quite a while since the last time she'd had someone to train, and it always provided her such great entertainment. The last group that had come up to be trained by her had been especially entertaining. However, Naruto was family, and from what she'd been able to learn, he had unknowingly began learning the techniques of her own style. Not only did he use the basic form of her taijutsu style, but from what Jiraiya had told her, he'd actually managed to use her Raigun technique, something which no one else had been able to pull off. That was one of the reasons she had for the clones doing the current exercise. Not only would it help boost Naruto's chakra control, but his control over the Raigun would improve dramatically, as would the potency and power of the technique once he got used to channeling chakra to his fingers. From there she would be able to take him further into the real training in her Reiko Hadoken Taijutsu. That however was for later, after the clones completed the exercise or dispelled, whichever came first. Regardless, she was sure the next few weeks would prove entertaining. There weren't many clouds in the sky, so the sun's rays could easily light up the Hidden Leaf Village on this sunny day. Furthermore, there was an electric tingle in the air that sent shivers down the spines of men, women, and children in equal measure. Sarutobi Hiruzen, the Sandaime Hokage, was anticipating today's events as a result of the excitement he felt from feeling the electricity from his position in the stadium that would host the 3rd stage of the Chunin selection exams. As it was, he hadn't felt his blood pump more vigorously in his veins in a while due to the cacophony of the crowd. He couldn't help but be impressed as he looked out at the arena. In just 2 months, the woman known as Washu had managed to convert the arena the village had used into a stadium with enough space to accommodate about 80,000 spectators. At Lady Sito's suggestion, he had announced the participants in the tournament. The list was actually pretty impressive, consisting of the heirs of the Nara, Aburame, and Inuzuka clans, the lone survivor of the Uchiha clan, and the heir of the Uzumaki clan. There were also 2 Hyugas, including the clan's heiress. Normally he wouldn't have announced Naruto's arrival, but he did, and he announced that he was selling exam tickets because so many people were attending. Apparently, the tickets sold out, and people from all over the elemental nations were pouring into the village to purchase them. "Sir, incoming." He was interrupted from his contemplation by the solemn murmur of his guard for the day. He turned to face the muscular Raikage when he appeared, greeting him with his presence. The Yondaime Raikage, also just called A, was a tall, dark, skinned man who was typical of Rai no Kuni. As mentioned earlier, his height of 6 feet 8 inches and well-groomed white hair with a trim mustache and beard contributed to his somewhat bulky appearance. Even though his office robes were torn, his bare chest was visible. He could also see the man's bodyguards, 2 of whom he recognized as Darui and the other as the man's adopted brother B. "Ah, Raikage. Dono, it has been some time." The Hokage stood up and greeted the man. "Indeed, it has, though I was surprised to receive your invitation," the man said sternly. "I must agree, I always assumed there would be a cold day in hell before I was ever invited into this village," declared a fresh voice. The Hokage instantly recognized this voice as belonging to his personal adversary from the Shinobi Wars. The man was quite small, only 4 feet 4, with a triangle-shaped mustache and beard, but his big red nose and thick eyebrows were what set him apart. He wore a green and yellow coat with a red collar, and the top of his head was completely bald, but the lower half of his head was covered in long white hair. He had mesh armor covering both of his shirt sleeves and an Iwa flak jacket on underneath. "Trust me, Onoki. I thought hell would freeze over before I ever allowed you across the border," Hiruzen said. The members of the rookie teams that had not advanced to the finals, as well as the Kunoichi member of Team Guy, were seated in another area of the arena. Some of them, like Ino and Sakura, were happy they hadn't advanced to the finals even though they were excited about their next matches. Sure, they knew the third exam would serve as a public showcase, but this was absurd. "Man, can you believe this crowd?" Ino expressed amazement at the number of people encircling them. "I know, I thought we'd never get to our seats." Sakura voiced her complaint. Just entering the arena had been difficult due to the large number of attendees, and once inside they had to deal with internal traffic of people trying to find their seats or make bets, get food, or use the restroom. Since Sakura had only arrived back in the village the night before, she was completely unprepared for the large number of people that had suddenly moved into her community. She had to admit, though, that the arena was impressive. It was enormous, and when she looked up, she saw a big black cube suspended from the center, supported by gray beams. If the arena had a roof instead of just open space above, the cube might not have seemed so strange. Ino called out, "Uruka. Sensei, over here," bringing Sakura's focus back to the ground. Sakura turned to face them and saw their old academy teacher walking over, followed by a group of children that, based on Ino's expression, she was not pleased to see. Then Choji chose that exact moment to sit down, his arms laden with snacks, drawing her attention to her right. With wide eyes at the amount Choji had brought, Sakura asked, "Did you get enough, Choji?" "I don't know, maybe I should go back." Choji spoke as she turned to face the entrance, where she knew the concession stand was, after glancing down at his snacks. "Don't bother, Choji, by the time you get back the matches would have already started," declared Tenten, made the Akamichi deflate at the thought of running out of food. The Jurian nobility, seated further behind them, were all anticipating the start of the competition. None was more nervous than Hakuba Ryoko. If there was one thing she liked to do, it was fights, so she was excited about the prospect of watching multiple ones because she had seen some of what Naruto was capable of. Others were more worried about the new member of their group, a woman they had only met the night before. It was shocking to discover that Naruto's father had belonged to a clan with the same high status as the Masaki, even though they were aware of his father's Jurian ancestry. But none had been more taken aback than Seto. Before going missing, she had recalled the Tatsuki heir, and when Jiraiya learned of her family's passing, she had even wept. She was the girl's godmother after all, even though her death had never been verified and she had spent a lot of money looking for her. The younger woman gave her a thorough explanation of what had happened and some of the things she had been up to over the last several hundred years, but her thoughts were cut short when a voice interrupted, silencing the arena. They had spent the most of the night up talking with each other. Now that he was back with the Sandame, he had been joined and greeted by the Mizukage and the Kazekage, who had arrived last. His eyes had widened as he realized how many people were there. None of the current Kages was blind to the fact that the 5 Kages had only met once previously. The Mizukage was distinct from the others because, at just 4 feet 6 inches, he looked to be the youngest by far. He had untidy light gray hair, pink pupil, less eyes, and a scar that ran from under his left eye down his cheek and looked like it had been sewn together. Like the Hokage and Raikage, he also wore the office robes, but his were blue and white. Despite the fact that his village was located in the middle of the harsh Kase no Kuni desert, it was not surprising that the 5 feet 7 inches Kage was dressed in his official green and white robes complete with a veil. Despite this, none of his features were visible. Well, let's get this started now that everyone is present. However, I would very much welcome the chance to win some extra cash if any of you would like to wager on today's events. Hiruzen said this, getting to his feet and stepping forward to make himself seen. When he did, the cube that was suspended over the stadium began to come to life and displayed his picture for everyone to see. The man was greeted as "ladies and gentlemen," and was instantly quieted by the audience. He had used voice projection to make his voice heard when he stood up. I would like to thank everyone for coming to our Chunin selection exam tournament and to welcome you all. Without further ado, let's get started. The audience erupted in applause as he finished, and then the screen blinked to show a lone shinobi standing on the arena floor, dressed in the traditional Konoha shinobi uniform. This shinobi was a man of 5 feet 9 inches with shoulder length brown hair falling around his face. Her mouth was full of senbons, like a toothpick, and he wore his hite tae like a bandana tied around his head. I, Shiranui Genma, will be serving as the proctor for this particular exam section. Having said that, I will now formally start this exam section with today's opening game. Everyone looked down to see that neither competitor was there, and for a few moments there was silence. The sound of a slow guitar playing, however, soon broke the stillness. These have been such long, difficult days. Nobody says, "Gods change my ways. Modify my behaviors, those wicked ones." So I started walking that way. Hit them with a blow to force them to pay. Modify their actions, their wicked ways. A figure could be seen emerging at the base of the arena hood with the hood drawn over his head as the slow motion song played. Simultaneously, the screen above came to life with images of unidentified individuals who were beaten, bloodied, and bruised inside a closed space encircled by a wire fence cage. The song stopped as the lyrics did, and the figure stood motionless for a few seconds before raising his hands and clenching his knuckles. There came a new voice that many Konoha residents recognized as Mitarashi Anko, representing Team 8 under Junin Yuhi Kurenai, the phenomenal one, Inazuka Kiba. The music returned in full force, this time with an instrumental, as hands shot up and he threw back his hood to reveal a savagely grinning Kiba with Akamaru perched on his head. I can't hide, though, ooh. And I promise not to hide my sinister habits. I discovered that hatred becomes icy. Rise, God, and damn my soul. Since I haven't changed, alter my behavior. I have not changed. Kiba approached Genma as this segment was playing, the screen above depicting the same inanimate objects being beaten around the cage, one person even being thrown through it on screen. But as he was getting comfortable next to Genma, the music suddenly stopped and a new one started. I hear voices inside of me. They advise me, they comprehend. They converse with me. You have your faith and your set of rules. All intended to keep you secure. However, when regulations begin to be breached, your faith begins to be questioned. My voice is what will save me. Loves to hate and hates to love. My voice possesses the expertise and the authority to control your destiny. The crowd erupted in applause upon seeing the Hyuga genius Neji as the music began to play. He moved slowly out of the entrance, stopped, turned to face Kiba, and then started moving again, albeit slowly and methodically. He had been moving around the arena before. Simultaneously, the screen displayed pictures of Neji eliminating individuals at random. I hear sobs. I witness heroes perish. I taste dried up blood. Tension is building within me. I'm hearing voices in my brain. They advise me, they comprehend. They speak with me, they speak with me. They give me instructions on what to do. They display to me what I'll do to you. Talking to me, talking to me, talking to me. And his opponent representing Team Guy, under Junin Maeda Guy's 6-time underground fighting champion, he is the apex predator of the Hidden Leaf, the Viper, Hyuga Neji. As Anko's words registered with the Hyuga present in the stands, they all had to do a collective double take. Though many of them had heard about it, none of them had ever gone underground. In actuality, not many of them were prepared to go into a place where chakra usage was prohibited, despite their boasts of having the strongest taijutsu in the entire village. But to find that Neji had not only visited, fought, and survived there, told many that the strength of the individual, not the clan, was what mattered. Many of the residents of the main house were observing the boy in a different way, and not for the first time, they were silently cursing his birth into the branch family. In another part of the stands, Ino, Sakura and Tenten had all froze before turning their gazes to Choji, who didn't even slow in his snaking. Behind them their Junin sensei had also stopped in shock, most notably Guy, whose eyes had bulged out of his head in his shock at this news. How could I not know this? Muttered Guy in shock. First rule of Fight Club, don't talk about it. Stated Kakashi, shrugging his shoulders. You sound like you speak from experience, Kakashi. Stated Asuma with narrowed eyes. Or I could just be a fan of fighting movies. Said Kakashi, causing the others to turn away from the copy nin. Down on the floor the two genin stood stock still, each of them silently eyeing the other. As it stood, they had faced each other 4 times in the underground, and of those 4 times each of them had won twice. This, however, was different than battles in the underground, whereas in all their previous battles chakra usage had been illegal. Here pretty much anything goes. For Neji that meant that the Byakugan and subsequently the Hyuga clan's prized Jiyuken taijutsu style were going to make an appearance. For Kiba it meant that he would be able to use not just his partner Akamaru, but all the tricks he'd picked up training as an Inuzuka. Despite this change, both recognized that one thing would remain the same: when it came right down to it in a fight these two were vicious. Neji shifted and in an instant Kiba had leapt back, flinging a trio of shuriken his way, which the Hyuga knocked aside with a kunai. Once done, Neji shot forward, quickly closing the distance that had separated them, only to stop on a dime as a white blur shot just past his face that flipped and revealed itself to be Akamaru as the pup skidded across the ground on all 4s before stopping. Great, that didn't work, but at least it bought me some time. Still, how the hell am I supposed to beat this guy now? I can't fight him at close range since Hinata says he's better at Jiyuken than she is, and those damn strikes are dangerous. One bad move and the whole thing could be over. Can't fight him long range as I don't have the skill to snipe him from far off. Guess we'll have to blitz him. If I can force him on the defensive and keep the pressure on him, I should be able to make him slip up. Thought Kiba as a bead of sweat dropped from his chin due to nervousness. Kiba, this is your one chance. There is no shame in backing down from a battle you know you can't win. Stated Neji, only for Kiba to suddenly smirk. Now what fun would that be, especially when I'm going to beat you? Said Kiba. Suddenly the duo were a buzz of motion as Kiba rushed him. However, instead of the straight blitz Neji was expecting, the Inuzuka leapt into the air and in an instant had become a literal buzzsaw of death as he spun and his body had become what looked like a small twister aiming straight at the Hyuga. Leaping away, Neji watched in shock as the vortex, like Inuzuka, struck the ground only to quickly vacate the area, leaving nothing but a crater in his wake. As he flew into the air once more, Kiba's form unraveled only for him to flip himself in midair before spinning right back towards the Hyuga, who once again leapt away to a safe distance. Landing on the ground with a crash, Kiba stood up out of his crouched position. Despite his not being able to score a hit, however, he was smirking as it was soon shown he was standing about 2 feet away from Akamaru. Reaching a hand into his pants pocket, he quickly pulled it out and in a quick motion had flicked a pill over towards Akamaru, who caught and swallowed it in a single go. Suddenly Akamaru underwent a change as his previously white fur changed to a dark red before his chakra seemed to flare, and with a plume of smoke the dog had transformed into a copy of Kiba, only more feral due to his clawed nails, shaggier hair and fang-like teeth. Neji's attention was soon pulled to Kiba as he soon underwent a bit of a transformation himself, leaving the two looking like exact copies of one another. Akamaru, we're going with that plan, stated Kiba, his voice holding a slightly deeper tone. Soon all of Neji's focus was on dodging as both Kiba and Akamaru had turned into a pair of drills as they each shot at him. Gritting his teeth, he strained his Byakugan in order to be able to continuously dodge the incoming attacks. Despite this, as the duo kept up the attacks, Neji was shown to only barely be able to stay ahead of them as their pattern of attack seemed to be random. He had yet to even attempt to counter the attack due to the fact that just a passing touch from one of them on a nearby tree had left deep scratch marks through its bark, informing him the sides were well protected. Alright Akamaru, I'm ending this, came Kiba's voice echoing through the stadium. As he said this, his form unraveled and still in midair showed him with his eyes closed and hands framing his face with his fingers spread apart. Taiyoken, Fist of the Sun, shouted Kiba, opening his eyes as he did. There was a sudden, quick yet intense blast of light that struck the entirety of the arena. Neji, having been focused on the Kiba heading his way with the full intensity of his Byakugan on him, was hit the worse, as evidenced when he screamed in pain as he instinctively put his hands over his eyes after being blinded. Only those of the Inuzuka clan and those who'd worked with them previously had been spared, having all known to do everything in their power to not see it. Let's end this. Gatsuga. As the two Inuzuka clan members began their attack, those watching, that could actually see, especially of the Inuzuka, had to smirk at the sight, as it was pretty clear it was over. However, as Kiba and Akamaru neared him, Neji, though unable to see, looked up, his face a mask of fury as they bared down upon him. Kaiten. In the next instant, Neji began to spin himself, and as he did, a literal dome of chakra suddenly appeared surrounding him. Kiba and Akamaru, already dedicated to the attack and so close, already slammed headlong into the dome. For several moments the two forces fought chakra dome against twin twisters before the Kaiten won out and the two Inuzukas were blasted back and away from the Hyuga. As visibility returned, everyone could see the dome that the Hyuga had created, which seemed to extend about 4 feet outwards from him before it slowed to a stop to reveal Neji standing unharmed. At the same time, they watched as Kiba and Akamaru both flew in separate directions before hitting the ground and tumbling for several feet, with Akamaru's transformation dispelling. Neji, having been facing Akamaru's direction, could see Kiba sprawled out as he looked back over his shoulder. Those watching who had never actually seen him in battle in the underground or lose his cool could see his face was still a mask of pure fury and unadulterated rage. He was breathing hard, taking several deep breaths, as seen by the pumping of his chest, and his fists were actually clenched up. His rage was so great that he began pacing as his arms shook as he tried to restrain him. Those who had seen this before suddenly began cheering loudly, knowing the sign for what it was, though even they would be surprised soon. Suddenly he stopped and roared as he arched his back and spun around, his body falling and slamming to the ground. On his hands and knees, Neji threw all care for appearance to the wind as his body arched up and both his fists hit the ground once, twice, and then a third time before he hit it one more time with his left, then with his right, and finally flattened his body to the ground, palms down, as his eyes locked onto Kiba, who was slowly recovering. Pushing up off the ground just a bit and now positioned on his fists, Neji showed why he was called the Viper, as he was coiled just like a snake prepared to strike. Getting his feet up under him as Kiba slowly pushed himself to his feet, Neji set himself into a stance, his Byakugan once again activating of its own accord, and as Kiba turned, Neji struck, closing the short distance between them in an instant as he announced his technique to Kiba, who only had time for his eyes to widen. Jukano. Hake Rokuhuion Sho. The blows came down at fast speeds, first 2 strikes that landed flush, then another 2, followed by 4, followed by 8, followed by 16. As it was, Kiba could only stagger with the speed and strength of the attacks increasing in with each set of attacks, yet even still Neji kept it up, bringing down a final set of 32 with the final strike sending Kiba flying back before he hit the ground on his back. The stands had gone silent as everyone stared down at the Hyuga prodigy and his beaten opponent. The silence was a stunned and shocked kind, none more prevalent than in the stands where the Hyuga clan was sitting. While those from Konoha in general knew that the move was a rare special move of the Hyuga clans, only the clan itself knew that it was a move that was reserved for the main branch and was passed down orally just to ensure that only they learned it. The fact that Neji knew not just 1, but 2 attacks that had been reserved for main house usage as a branch member was truly shocking. It was only the fact that Neji's music hit and Anko's voice came over the stadium announcing Neji the winner that had broken people out of the trances and had the stands rocking with applause and cheers. To think talent like that almost completely wasted, mused Hiyashi aloud as he watched his nephew exit the arena while the medics carried Kiba out. Kiba's gotten pretty good, said Hana from beside her mother. True, he'd have won that match against just about anyone else, stated Sume. Sume, did you notice what he did with his Sunga? Questioned Kigali from behind her. I counted 27 rotations per second, damn, that's not half bad, stated Hideki. Not only that, but the way he used it, purposely unraveling so he can change directions on a dime and head back out with the same speed, stated Sume. Plus he didn't even engage the Shikyaku no Jutsu, 4-legged technique, until after Akamaru had engaged the Jujin Bunshin. In a few years he may just be the strongest in the clan, stated Jin. After they had gotten Kiba loaded up on a stretcher and cleared from the arena, Neji having long since, Genma called for the next match in the lineup. Tamari from her position in the fighter's booth leapt down, impressing several people as she used her fan to glide down and land softly on the ground. Before she could even make it halfway to Genma, however, her attention, like that of Genma's in the crowds, was pulled to the entrance. "You think you know me?" echoed a female voice, which was immediately followed by the beating of drums. "On this day I see clearly everything has come to life. Bitter place and a broken dream, and we leave it all behind. On this day it's so real to me, everything has come to life. Another chance to chase a dream. Another chance to feel alive." As the words echoed through the arena, Shikamaru emerged from the arena entrance. Though he walked out, it could be seen that he moved with purpose, as everyone could tell by the look in his eyes. Not only that he had changed slightly, his hair had been let loose from its ever-present tail and was free to hang down to his shoulders, and he wore a black leather jacket that hung down to his ankles. This version of him, unlike his usual self, caused many of the teenage girls in the stands to squeal loudly. Those watching the screens could once again see the sight of people being tossed around the cage. However, also joining these images, them being slammed through tables and cracked upside the head with chairs. Representing Team 10, under Junin Sarutobi is Suma, 3-time underground fighting champion, the rated R superstar Nara Shikamaru. "On this day I see clearly everything has come to life. Bitter place and a broken dream, and we leave it all behind." In the stands, none were more surprised by this than those of the Nara clan. Nara men were typically looked at as lazy, and Shikamaru was no exception to this. However, in truth, they just weren't motivated to do much, since most things came so easily to them due to their intelligence. Putting in too much effort was viewed as troublesome. Nara Yoshino herself had been rendered speechless for the first time in years, stuck between being elated at her son's accomplishments and highly pissed off about what he'd been doing with his free time, so she reasoned she could settle for both a little later in private. Asuma and Ino, however, were gaping as they watched the version of Shikamaru on the screen do things they never would have expected of him. The match that followed, though much slower than that of the previous match, was one that was much more interesting. These two were strategists at their cores, and it showed as they executed moves and counter moves. Many of those watching were taking note of the strategies used, hoping to use them in the future. Shikamaru had nearly captured her once before, if not for a timely shout from Konkuro, which saved her just in the nick of time. Eventually, the game of cat and mouse came to an end when Shikamaru managed to capture her with his Kage main no jutsu. Normally this is the part where I would quit, because going forward would be too troublesome," stated Shikamaru as he walked slowly back towards the center, forcing Tamari to mimic the action. "Unfortunately, after what you did to Ino, I don't have that option. Surrender or I will put you down," stated Shikamaru. Tamari gritted her teeth in anger at the predicament she had found herself in. She had gotten careless and allowed herself to be trapped. Still, she refused to quit an action she soon found herself regretting, as Shikamaru released the shadow hold, yet before she could regain her bearings, pain unlike any she'd felt before invaded her senses as the Nara air struck, and Tamari found herself folded over, feeling as if she'd nearly been broken in half. "Spear!" exclaimed Shoji along with several other people within the stands upon seeing the move. As Shikamaru popped back up, having tackled her and drove his shoulder directly into her midsection, his music hit once more while Tamari could only cradle her stomach as Shikamaru was declared the winner. After Shikamaru left the arena and Tamari was collected, Genma called down for the next match, only for Konkuro to forfeit, naming Shino the winner by default. Calling down the next fighters, Hinata emerged into the arena to little fanfare as she had no music to speak of. However, Sasuke was nowhere to be seen, and Genma found himself looking up towards the cage booth. "So the Uchiha is still not here," mused Hiruzen, frowning. "Perhaps it would be best to postpone his match. Many of the lords in attendance came to see him in action," stated the Kage. "No. He has wasted my time and that of our fellow Kage, not to mention that of the various lords and ladies that came to witness this event. Not only that, but to show favoritism just because of someone's clan name would bring shame to me in this village. I would not do so for my own son, so why would I do so for him?" stated Hiruzen, shocking the other Kage, though the three Kages aside from the Kage agreed with him. A few minutes later, after conferring with one of the Sandame's guards, Genma announced that due to his absence Uchiha Sasuke was disqualified and granted victory to Hinata. Seeing this, Hinata happily retreated out of the arena and as such out of the spotlight. Once she was gone, he announced for the next match, and Fu wasted no time leaping down, surprising several as she landed lightly on her feet. She had barely settled before the stadium once again rocked by music, and Lee came sliding out the entrance, actually dancing. Those who knew him were shocked as for once he was not wearing the one-piece spandex suit, instead he wore a short-sleeved dark green muscle shirt and a pair of green pants. "Don't you see the writing on the wall? Don't you see the writing on the wall? You're in way over your head, you're gonna drown in the things that you said. Time has come and gone for words, 1,000 threats I've heard before. But words are cheap, but lies are big to take." Representing Team Guy, 3-time underground fighting champion, the enigmatic enigma, Konoha's green beast, Rock Lee. Guy at this point was gaping, pointing down at his protege, yet no words able to come forth. Others however were more focused on the screen, where they could see doing some amazing things, leaping off the top of the cage and off of ladders and landing on opponents to take them down. Not only that, they could see him actually using chairs and even ladders as weapons. Guy wasn't the only one in shock however, as Tenten was equally stunned, as with how much Lee yapped his mouth she was surprised she'd never heard of this. It's a paradox, a mystery, a riddle. A door in your face and only I have the key. Do understand, you'll be caught in the middle. Caught in a web by being spun by me. Don't you see the writing on the wall? Don't you see the writing on the wall? Just a victim of your own conceit, the architect of your own defeat. Finally the music stopped as Lee arrived in the center of the arena. As he looked, the two over Genma smirked around his senbon because he could tell that these two were ready to fight. Seeing this, he started the match and was only barely able to get out of the way as the two clashed, with Fu blocking a kick sent her way by Lee with her right forearm. As she pushed him off, Lee used the momentum to spin off to his left and send yet another kick her way. Grabbing the leg, Fu showed surprising strength as he threw him away, only for Lee to catch himself on his hands and flip to his feet. "You're good, but you disrespect me by holding back," stated Fu. Before Lee could comment, he found himself folded over the girl's arm as her right fist dug into his stomach. At least that's how it appeared at the last instant. He managed to stop her grabbing her forearm and sucking in his stomach in order to avoid the blow. Undeterred from her missed attack, Fu quickly twisted her arm, grabbing him by the shirt and tossing him over her head, with Lee landing roughly on the ground, though he quickly rolled back to a kneeling position. Looking up, he leapt to the side as Fu landed where he'd been kneeling, her fist striking the ground with enough force to bury itself for about an inch. Launching himself forwards at quick speeds, Lee sent his own fist forward, only for the smaller girl to catch it in her palm. "You're boring me, now get serious," said the girl before kicking him away with a kick to the chest. Narrowing his eyes as he brought his hand up to his chest, Lee decided he needed to end things fast as the girl's strength was insane. Reaching down, he rolled up his pants leg, revealing the limb to be containing weights, which he quickly went about unstrapping from his leg. Switching his position quickly, he soon found himself holding to bands containing weights as he stood to his feet and tossed them behind him. Before they'd even hit the ground, Lee had closed the distance and sent Fu flying with a hard right to her jaw. At the same time as the weights hit the ground, Fu hit the arena wall, both of them making sounds as they struck, but the weights drowning hers out. Pushing herself to her feet, Fu found herself smiling despite herself. It had been a long time since she had come upon someone who could truly push her in a battle of fist. While she'd been able to see and track his movements, her shock at his speed had been enough for him to nail her one that she could actually feel. Suddenly her form was a blur and Lee found himself flying backwards, himself however recovering in mid-air. He spun and hit the ground, feet first, skidding for several feet before he himself vanished in a burst of speed. From that point on, from the perspective of most spectators, the two had become two blurs, one white and the other green, darting all over the arena and clashing numerous times. Suddenly Fu appeared flying through the air vertically, her head thrown back, while Lee could be seen on the ground, his legs still extended from the upward kick he landed to her chin. In the next instant he was gone, vanishing in a blur, only to appear directly behind her with the fingertips of his right hand planted directly into the center of her back. Suddenly the bandages that had been wrapped around Lee's forearms had come undone and wrapped around Fu's entire body, leaving only her head, neck and collarbone unbound. Once done, Lee flipped them so that they were heading towards the ground head first and began to spin, his speed increasing as they traveled towards the ground. "Omet Renge, front lotus." As the exclamation was heard, the two hit the ground, creating an explosion on impact. As smoke, rock and dust were thrown into the air from the impact, Lee came leaping out already in mid-flip, landing on his feet facing the impact point and skidding to a stop before falling onto his butt, breathing heavily. For nearly a minute the arena was dead silent, everyone watching the point of impact and waiting as slowly the smoke began to clear. Finally the last of the smoke cleared to reveal Fu laid out in the center of a crater nearly 3 feet deep. However, before Lee could celebrate, Fu slowly pushed herself up into a sitting position, allowing him and everyone else to get a good look at her, both on screen and for those close enough in person. Her entire upper body was covered in cracks like glass from head to toe, even her clothes and hair. As she moved, the cracks continued to spread, and as she finally stood to her feet, the sound of glass shattering could be heard as her body seemingly fell apart. As it did, it revealed that beneath that surface Fu was unharmed save for a busted lip as she turned to face Lee. "You know, I hadn't held much hope for anyone outside of Gaara and Naruto, however you actually broke my shell, so you're not as weak as the rest of your kind," stated Fu. In the next instant, however, she was in front of Lee and sending him flying with a well-executed kick to the chest. Following after him, Fu leapt until she hovered over him and smacked him right back down to the ground with a right punch that landed flush with his jaw that had him hitting the dirt hard and sent him rolling. "Now then, show me what else you can do," stated the girl as she touched down, her orange eyes seemingly glowing. As he watched her, Lee did his best to get his body to respond. Renge techniques were classified as kenjutsus due to the strain placed on the body due to the opening of the celestial gates needed to pull off the moves. Not only that, but looking into the girl's eyes had nearly made his lungs freeze, such was the fear they emitted in him. Just the pure hatred and loathing that could be seen within the pools of fire she called eyes. As if her eyes weren't enough, she lifted her right hand, the index finger glowing, reminding him absently of Naruto's during the preliminaries, which was just enough to get him to scramble, barely dodging the blast of red that punched a hole straight through him. As it was, his eyes widened, seeing the hole that the attack had made in the space he'd previously occupied. He soon found himself hastily avoiding many more such blasts. After the 10th blast, however, Lee surprised her along with the entire audience as he suddenly vanished, his form appearing at least 10 feet to the left in the next instant. Breathing heavily and covered in sweat from the exertion, Lee realized he would have to end this soon if he had any chance of winning this contest. "So you've still got some fight left in you after all, good," stated Fu as she turned to regard the green-clad leaf nin. "That's the thing about the lotus flower. In the leaf, it blooms twice." "Simon. Kai, Gate of Life. Release," stated Lee, causing several eyes within the stands to widen in shock, especially as his skin actually turned red. And as if that wasn't enough, his body exploded with power so much that it literally formed a crater beneath him while it forced him to hunch over. "Showman. Kai, Gate of Pain. Release." In the next instant, he was gone, pushing off the ground with such force it actually exploded beneath him. Eyes wide at the show of power, Fu had no time to even react, and as such was entirely unprepared for the rising kick that caught her flush in the chin and forced her up and into the air. Before she could recover, Lee was already in motion and had leapt after her and slammed a powerful fist into her sternum. For the next several long and painful moments, she would learn what a pinball felt like as Lee smacked her around, sending her bouncing this way and that. Finally, Lee seemingly had enough and sent her flying towards the ground, his body tensing in mid-air as he prepared to end things. Fu, however, had had enough before Lee could do anything. Her body exploded with so much power that Lee was flung away from her head over heels, though he managed to flip right side up so that he landed on his feet. Turning to face Fu, he could see her surrounded by red chakra, which quickly dissipated to reveal Fu. However, she appeared differently in that she now sported a pair of wings upon her back that resembled that of an insect's. The wings themselves were orange in color, though protected by a bordered stem of green, with both wings having a greater length than Fu herself. Taking a breath, Fu released it, and with it a large quantity of a powdery substance that quickly covered the field. With the sun's rays shining directly on the substance, the effect was immediate as the arena was engulfed with a bright white light. When the light cleared, it was to show Lee lying in the dirt while Fu stood calmly upon the floor, her wings nowhere to be seen. However, what could be seen was the damage that had been inflicted upon her by Lee's last technique, as bruises were already starting to form. Rushing over, Genma quickly checked on Lee, and upon discovering that he was only unconscious, quickly declared the match over and Fu the winner. "That was intense," said Kiba from his position in the stands, a bead of sweat falling down from where it had been hanging on his chin. After his match, he had decided against heading back to the contestants' booth and had took up a position in the stands with the rest of his classmates who hadn't made it into the final tournament. Despite the fact that he had lost his match, several members of the clan had stopped to congratulate him on a well-fought battle, stating he'd have won that match against just about anyone else. His usage of what had been thought of as a simple D-rank technique to negate the benefits of a dojutsu as powerful as the Byakugan, even if only temporarily, had made his mother incredibly proud, especially as no one had ever thought to use it in such a way before. "Those two are monsters," said Ino, her eyes wide as she beheld the trashed arena. They weren't the only ones shocked, as all over the arena people were eyeing the damaged field in shock at the power that the two genin had put out. Lee, the one person that everyone had completely written off as an utter hopeless case, had just displayed a skill set that would make him more dangerous than many experienced chunin. Fu had done the same. Not only was she just as fast as Lee, if not a bit slower, but she was stronger, had a great defense, and if that wasn't enough, the more experienced shinobi like the Kages in attendance had realized the girl had a biju backing her and had at least partial control considering the wings she'd been able to summon. Of course, those same wings revealed she was the container of the Nanabi no Kabutomushi, as that was the only biju with wings. As it was the only ones ignoring the match, and its outcome for the time being were the members of the team of Doten users who were currently repairing the arena ground, as the last fight had destroyed nearly half of it. While the damaged ground was fine, the small space left available wasn't good and would severely limit the remaining competitors, and as such the team had been charged with fixing it. For their part, the Jurians with the exception were also impressed, even Miyako, as it was not often you would see kids with such ability. Sasami meanwhile was worried. They had returned to the village 2 days ago and no one had seen Naruto since. She had been by Ichiraku's and Ayame had told her he hadn't even stopped by. She hadn't even thought he was back in the village. What worried her most was that he'd had a private talk with Jiraiya the day they left the temple. After that he hadn't said a word, and it looked like he'd been really worried. Far away from the planet of Furia where the exams were taking place, another group of people were watching. Much deeper in space, in the very center of this sector of the universe on the planet Jirai, the Emperor himself Masaki Azusa and his wives Masaki Funaho and Masaki Masaki were also watching, along with a small, trusted group of friends which included several members of the Kuramitsu family. The Kuramitsu, while not of Jirai, were the second most powerful family within their sector of the universe. Their presence there, however, was due to the fact that their families were distantly related. The Masaki clan descended from the goddess Tsunami and the Kuramitsu descended from the goddess Washu, both members of the Shuzan, which were the three sister goddesses that had created their universe. Because of this recently discovered relation, and the fact that Kuramitsu Mihashi was currently on Furia with the rest of clan Masaki, the Kuramitsu had been invited to see the tournament which Washu was filming and was streaming live to Jirai. Also in attendance was a prominent member of Jirai's Tatsuki clan, Tatsuki Atsuko, the mother of Tatsuki Miyako and Masaki's longtime friend. When Masaki had received word that her friend's daughter had been found, she had been ecstatic and had wasted no time in contacting her to inform her of the good news. However, to learn that the two clans were now related through Naruto had put the duo in new heights of happiness, though both were saddened with the loss of grandchildren. After learning of this, Masaki had taken Atsuko to where they were keeping the bodies, as both were still being preserved. They would be buried together, but only after Naruto had arrived for the ceremony. Atsuko couldn't believe how handsome Minato was, and to learn that he was actually born on her own home planet, she had barely been able to keep herself from jumping in her ship and leaving. When she had left Furia, they had not been anywhere near as physically capable as they were now. Yes, they were a warrior race, but while she had been gone they had evolved to a level that was quite frankly unheard of. When she had left, she had been part of a crew for their initial space travel, the country trying to find any advantage to the almost constant state of war they had lived in. Their ship hadn't made it far before it had come under attack and had only been saved due to intervention by the Galactic Army. The captain of the ship that had rescued them had been Tatsuki Osamu, who would later become her husband. At this point, however, they were all watching the matches and all of them had been quite suitably impressed. To learn that Furia had advanced to such a level in terms of combat had filled Atsuko with pride. Despite the fact that these kids were so young, they possessed amazing combat abilities, and to see that and know that these genin, as they were called, weren't even the height of power said a lot about the warriors of the small planet. "This is incredible," stated Kuramitsu Misao, the younger brother of Mihashi. "Indeed, I had known that they possessed profound abilities, but this is much greater than I had imagined," stated Funaho in surprise. "And these children will all be attending the Galaxy Academy with Prince Naruto?" questioned Kuramitsu Mikami, the current head of the Kuramitsu clan. "Many of them, yes," stated Masaki. Back in Konoha within the cage booth, Sarutobi Hiruzen frowned as he looked out over the arena. During the short break while they were trying to fix the arena, he'd been informed that they had found Uchiha Sasuke. Apparently on their way to the arena, he and Kakashi had been assaulted by a group of Auto shinobi they had run across. While they had managed to dispatch the group, Sasuke had broken his wrist in the process and Kakashi had immediately taken the boy to the hospital. He would have to relay that bit of news to the council later, though he was inwardly pleased the Uchiha wasn't here. They'd already disqualified him and they didn't need him acting out demanding that he fight with all the foreign dignitaries in attendance, dignitaries that he himself had personally invited. Looking down at the field he could see that Gaara was already down there, yet his opponent Naruto was still nowhere to be seen. His thoughts on the matter however were cut off as the lights all over the building, except their booths suddenly cut off and the screen came to life. He is a part of a proud legacy. To be the man, you've got to beat the man. At these words the screen showed a young Jiraiya, perhaps 15, standing within the center of the cage, a gold belt around his waist only to be replaced by that of an older Jiraiya. I am the showstopper, the headliner, the main event, and you will never be better than the Heartbreak Kid. At these words a new image appeared on screen, this of a young man who looked much like Naruto, causing Hiruzen's eyes to widen as he realized it was a young Minato, perhaps 13, also with a golden belt around his waist. However, like before, the screen soon replaced him with the version that everyone knew as Yondaime Hokage, clad in Junin gear and his famed Haori. He is genetically superior. Don't let his size fool you, this kid is fast and he is strong. If you set him off he will rip you limb from limb. This time the voice was Anko's as she sat at a desk, a headset on with several people cheering behind her. There has never been one like him before and there never will again. Who the hell do you think you are? The voice was Neji's and he could be seen on screen a bit younger with a gold belt propped on his left shoulder. Since you need a reminder, let me tell you just who in the hell I am. I am Rage Incarnate. Chief ass whipper of sorry sons of bitches. I don't have a conscience, and if you want mercy you need to find some religion. Longer than I can remember I've been called a demon, and if that's the case I'll be the devil's favorite demon. Now do you know where you are? You're trespassing on private property. When you walk in here you're in my yard and you don't want to be here. Bad things happen in my yard, and they've been happening for a very long time. At this Naruto appeared on screen grabbing someone and throwing him into the side of the cage, slamming his head 4 times and letting him fall to the ground, a bloody mess. In the next shot it showed him grabbing a chair and slamming someone in the head with it, while another was shown being thrown through a glass window. The next shot showed him straddling the chest of another person and slamming his fist to their head. The next showed him leaping into the air and slamming another person in the head with his descending right fist, laying him out cold. I arrive, raise hell, and leave. I trust no one and I will stomp a mudhole in your ass and walk that son, bitch dry. I am a whole new kind of animal. With that the screen cut off, bathing the arena in darkness once more, leaving everyone who'd witnessed it talking about what they'd just seen. However, they didn't get long, for less than 5 seconds later a new voice came over the arena, echoing through the speakers. Behold the king of kings. Came the words, followed immediately by what many recognized as a live guitar riff, where those looking soon found the sight of an actual band located within a section of the stands. Yeah. I walk alone. I walk for miles inside this pit of danger. A place where no one follows me. I walk alone. I'm sick of all these people talking out their heads. I've never understood a damn thing that they've said. From words to actions, never knowing what they're about. I guess I'll have to chew them up and spit them out, and I said. Yeah. I walk for miles inside this pit of danger. I've swallowed down 1,000 years of anger. The weight of the world is falling on my shoulders. A place where no one follows me. I walk alone. It was at this point that Naruto made his appearance, walking out from the back to thunderous applause. Unlike everyone else, his outfit had gone through a change. While he still wore black pants, he had removed the bandages and their legs were now tucked into a pair of black combat boots. His shirt was still black as well, only now the sleeves were missing completely, and over this he also wore a black tactical combat vest along with a matching pair of bracers, each bearing the Uzumaki clan crest. Representing Team 7 under Junin Hitaki Kakashi, 7-time underground fighting champion, he is the king of kings, the animal, Uzumaki Naruto. It was as the cameras hit his face that the noise died. His face, one usually seen with a smile, was devoid of that emotion, and his eyes were no more than 2 pools of chipped ice. Even those who had seen him in the underground had never seen this look in his eyes before, as they usually burned with whatever emotion he'd been feeling at the time. However, there were only 2 people present who had seen such a look before, and as she got a glimpse of it, Sakura began shivering. Sakura. Chan, what's wrong? Questioned Ino, noticing the shaking that the pink-haired girl was doing. His eyes, it's just like Nami no Kuni. Said Sakura, fears she'd thought she'd put away coming right back to the forefront of her mind. Meanwhile on the ground Naruto and Gaara had locked eyes, both of them standing in front of Genma and neither of them saying a word. The music had long since stopped, yet even Genma himself was wary of the look in the blonde's eyes. It took him back to the Third Great Shinobi War, the one time someone had managed to actually get the Yondaime pissed off. The man's eyes had turned into chips of ice on that day, and it was on that day that he had earned his moniker and feared reputation, as he had used his Hiraishin no Jutsu and slaughtered the 1,000 Iwa nin that had encountered them. Knowing that Naruto was actually the man's son gave him all the motivation he needed to get the hell out of Dodge. Hajime. With the announcement of the match's start, Genma leapt back and away, hoping to put as much distance between himself and the two fighters as allowed. It was a good thing he had, as Naruto hadn't wasted a moment and in an instant had closed the short distance that had separated them, letting loose a left hook right for Gaara's jaw. Immediately Gaara's gourd burst open as the sand held within moved to block the blow, only for the fist to be a feint and Naruto to come in with his right, the sand reacting quickly and only just barely managing to catch the hook that had been aimed at the redhead's face. Despite the fact the blow was blocked, there was the sound of an explosion and suddenly the sand was blasted apart and Gaara was sent flying, only to land on a cloud of sand. Quickly following after him to press the attack, Naruto was met with a wall of sand that quickly moved to swallow him whole. Naruto, however, roared as he let loose another fist which slammed into the sand-made barrier before it blew apart. Seeing this, Gaara's hands clapped together and instantly the sand surrounding him reacted, slamming together with Naruto within it. Futon. Iaden, wind release, air bullets. The call had several people looking up just in time to see another Naruto leaping off the top of the arena wall and launching a barrage of air bullets towards Gaara. Narrowing his eyes, Gaara motioned outward, causing a wall of sand to form to stop the bullets in their tracks. Not done, the red-headed Suna Nin formed a seal, causing tendrils of sand to launch out of the wall at the still airborne Naruto, who while able to dodge the first was impaled by the second. However, instead of what he expected, the blonde burst into a cloud of smoke. An explosion behind him caused Gaara to turn his head just in time to see another Naruto emerge from the ground just behind him. As he did, a ball of power swirled into existence within his right hand, packed with so much chakra it was clearly visible to the naked eye. Rasengan. With the exclamation, Naruto brought the ball forward as Gaara's gourd burst apart into a wall of sand. Despite the hastily raised defense, the Rasengan burst straight through it and slammed flush into Gaara's back. For a second it was still before the redhead was literally thrown away, crying out in agony. Within the stands, both Kankuro and Temari were gaping in shock. It had been since the beginning of the match. For them, the match from the start had already had a foregone conclusion, but to see a genin able to actually render the sand their brother commanded useless shocked them to the core. But to see that same genin not only manage to land a hit, but from the sound of things actually managed to injure him, left them feeling surprised and very much afraid. In a different part of the stands, the rookies that had not made it so far were cheering at the sight, all of them having gotten into the match, which one of their number was clearly dominating. Even Sakura had gotten over her small flash of fear and had fully invested into the match that was currently taking place. "What the hell was that?" exclaimed Kiba, actually jumping to his feet only to wince and quickly sit back down. It's called the Rasengan, one of the original techniques created by the Yondaime Hokage and one incredibly hard to learn. At this point, including Naruto, there are only 3 people who can use that technique, stated Asuma, causing many of the genin to gape, as did several of the adults that heard this. "Kakashi, you actually taught him a move like that?" questioned Kurenai, surprised. "No," stated Kakashi, not taking his eye off of the field. "The Rasengan is an A-rank technique and not something I'd feel comfortable teaching him. On top of that, ever since the beginning he and I have spent our time working on his taijutsu, any and all ninjutsu he knows he did not learn from me. What I can say, however, is that whereas it took Jiraiya 6 months to learn and myself nearly 8, Naruto managed to learn it within 2. Stated Kakashi, shocking them even further. 2 months, Kami the kid must be some rare breed of genius. Stated Asuma. Not even close. Came a new voice, surprising everyone as they turned to see Miyako, in her disguise as an old woman, staring down at the arena floor. That idiot grandson of mine is as far from a genius as Uchiha Madara was a dog lover. However, he is stubborn, more stubborn than Hashirama was, and with more drive as well. The combination of Uzumaki stubbornness and naturally large chakra pool, the Senju body and the energy manipulation ability of both the Masaki as well as my own family taken together and added on top of his condition, he'll surpass both Hashirama and Madara in strength and ability within the next few years." "Wait, did you say grandson?" questioned Kurenai in shock. Of course, his father had to come from somewhere, he didn't just appear from thin air," said Miyako. Naruto, on the other hand, was on the ground, warily observing as Gaara's still flailing body was covered in sand. The redhead's agonized screams rang out, but the sand kept trembling and shitting. Gradually, the agonizing cries subsided and were replaced by a crazy chuckle, as Naruto braced himself for the next phase of his battle. He had run into Fu and Gaara the day he had returned, and he had picked up some information about each of them. They had been friendly with each other, so she did want to fight Fu, but she only wanted to see who was better because she thought it would be entertaining. It was actually frightening how similar the two of them were. The only thing that separated them was that, although Fu was focused on escape, he wanted to lead and make changes to ensure that people like them were never created again. They had both relied on their dreams to help them get through the hardships of their lives. When they discovered she was the Nanabi Jinchuriki, they had more solid ground to stand on. He also told them about the process he had gone through to bring the fox back to full strength and how they were gradually losing stability and would soon reach a point where they would blow up the whole thing. Even though Fu hated everyone on the planet, especially the people in her village, she actually got along pretty well with her Biju, so she was terrified of this kind of situation. She thus leapt at the chance to fix it after he mentioned that it could be fixed similarly to Kyuubi's. Although he had told her it would take some time, he still promised to finish it. Contrarily, Gaara was a totally different story. If anything, he served as a mirror, reflecting what might have been. Owing to events beyond his control, he had come to feel that taking other people's lives was the only way to show people that he existed. Otherwise, he would have to lead a life devoid of meaning. He held that people would only betray you if you gave them the chance, so you should only fight for what you want and love yourself. Regretfully, he was with Sasami when the Suna Nin attempted to attack her, and he lost his cool. Had Guy not shown up, the two of them would have immediately engaged in combat. He hadn't admitted it, but the experience had left him deeply shaken. He had escorted Sasami back to the compound before leaving himself. Gaara stood for everything he had denied about himself, for all the darker feelings he had buried in his childhood to become the jovial, self-assured person that the world had come to know. He knew his inner self, those darker emotions would help him, and that was the only place he had ever even attempted to channel the other side of himself. The orphan's stipend he had received back then had been pitifully small, and the money he made underground had been the only thing saving him from starvation. Still, he was forced to leave and reassess his circumstances after his encounter with Gaara. Because of this, he had followed some advice that had enabled him to become well known in the underground. He had to return to somewhere. He needed to go back to the beginning, away from the clan compound and his parents' apartment, back to the dilapidated orphanage from which he had been expelled before turning 5 years old, back to the streets and alleys where he had slept before receiving his first apartment. There was only one reason he had returned and faced the ghosts of his past. He had never really considered doing it, but those darker feelings those locations had evoked in him had enabled him to do it. Unlike when he was in Nami no Kuni or even on the way home from that mission, he had now completely immersed himself and accepted those emotions as a part of who he was. He had used those feelings to reach that other part of himself that he had so long ago buried and brought it to the surface. As a result, he chose to embrace the real article, the whole Uzumaki Naruto, instead of portraying a character as he had done in the past. This was because he had been terrified of this character for a very long time. The sand that had covered Gaara broke apart, sending him hurtling towards him, but this time, he was different, shattering his thoughts on the subject. He now looked like a humanized version of the sand demon, with the exception of the lower part of his legs, which were completely covered in sand. Large claws had grown out of his hands, and blue, linear markings covered every part of his body, including his head, which was now shaped like a tanuki with ears, while a long tail wrapped itself around him. Naruto was unprepared for Gaara to swipe his tail outward and launch a volley of sand bullets at him as he leapt back to avoid the initial lunge. The blonde clenched his fist again and thrust it forward, narrowing his eyes. Futon. Senpuken, wind release, whirlwind fist. He unleashed a blast of wind as he threw his fist forward, slamming into the bullets that were aimed at him and canceling each other out, creating a gap for the blonde as the remaining bullets went by without effect. But Gaara had not stood still. He had immediately unleashed his own wind blast, for which Naruto was unprepared and which took him completely by surprise, slamming into him with great force and sending him flying back. Gaara left his spot without pausing, swiftly closing the gap, slamming the blonde in the stomach with his clawed arm, and pressing his body into the earth, Gaara was halted before he could take further advantage, though, as what appeared to be steam started to come out of him. Watchers could only stare as the steam burst forth, encircling him in a circle. White smoke started to spiral and climb upward before it was abruptly pushed aside by a deep orange, almost red chakra that appeared so strong that it was actually making trenches in the earth as it circled the blonde. The blonde slowly shifted into a hands and foot position that gave many the impression that he was an animal. Simultaneously, the chakra emanating from him made many of the villagers present clench up in fear as memories of that terrible night 13 years ago returned to them, especially because of the bloodlust they could all sense from it. The chakra materialized at the top of the spiral, resembling the head of a kitsune, its fangs bared, staring lifelessly at Gaara, as if to validate their fears. His eyes turned blood red with a slitted pupil, his hands shifted slowly to become claws, and his whisker, like markings, deepened. Naruto roared as he stood up, sending shockwaves through the arena and making Gaara take a small step back. Many Inuzuka and Aburame also shivered, having to force themselves to keep from falling to their knees. The roar had been one of challenge as well as rage. At last, the animal side of Naruto that had lain dormant for so long had awoken. The next time, he had gone over the edge, and Naruto had struck Gaara in the face with a fist that had sent him flying. Naruto leapt, taking to the air and landing feet first on the possessed Suna Nin's stomach as Gaara shot back. When the two reached the ground, Naruto didn't stop leaping on top of the other teenager, driving him further into the earth, and then launching himself away as Gaara's tail began to swipe at him. Gaara managed to get up just in time to see Naruto staring at him with a dark smirk on his face and an index finger glowing red as it pointed directly at him. The chakra was released in the next instant, bringing the entire demonic chakra with it and slamming into Gaara's crossed arms with a tremendous burst of red energy. Gaara was propelled into the arena and through the wall while the two were holding each other for a brief moment, leaving a lengthy trench behind them. Naruto, in his typical attire, ducked his head and panted. Massive explosions shook the arena before more could be done. He glanced up and saw a few people leaping at their neighbors from the stands, and a few more were running toward the field toward him. And if that wasn't enough, he looked up to see the cages fleeing their exclusive booth in favor of the roof due to another explosion. The blonde, gritting his teeth, hurried off the field to find Kakashi because, as he had been warned, the invasion of Konoha had started.
So that's it for today. I hope you guys enjoyed it. Don't forget to like, share and subscribe to the channel for more awesome stories like this. Thank you. See you all in my next video.